This is Transformation Ground Control, your source for all things business, technology, strategy, and change. If you're growing your business, leading change within your organization, or undertaking any sort of operational or technology change initiative, this podcast is for you. This show covers what you need to know about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling. I want to thank you for joining here today and have an exciting episode for you today. It's the best of or the greatest hits of Season 1 of Transformation Ground Control. So what we've done here is we've curated what we think or what I think are the best episodes or the best interviews that we've conducted thus far in the show. And there's a heavy focus here today on case studies. Some of the best interviews we've had have been ones that take a real-life case study, unpack it, talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, and all the stuff in between. And that's what we want to talk about here today, is to sort of replay to you what some of those highlights are and what some of the best segments are that you may have missed in the show so far. And if you're a frequent listener and you're listening every week or you're watching every week on YouTube, these are the best interviews that may be good reinforcement and some good lessons that might be worth revisiting from when you first heard them. So we've got 4 interviews in particular we're going to cover here today. First of all, we're going to have Rob Taylor, who is the IT director at a entertainment retail organization called Sight and Sound, which is a client of ours at Third Stage. He is on the show, or he was on the show, talking about some lessons from his ERP implementation. They recently selected and implemented Microsoft Dynamics 365. In the interview, he also talks quite a bit about how to manage a transformation during this COVID post-pandemic environment with remote work teams and all that good stuff, and especially with the impact to the business. Their business was significantly affected by COVID and by the shutdowns, and he talks about how some of the ways that they navigated that. So Rob will be the first guest on deck. We also have Tarak Patel, who was the VP of IT at a large beverage manufacturer. They produce wines and alcohol, and they recently went through a SAP transformation. So we'll talk to him about some of the lessons from his transformation and some of the lessons learned there. We also have James Hayward, who's the CFO of a company called Jane's Defence Weekly in the UK. They're one of our clients out of our UK office in London, and he'll talk about not only a transformation and some of the lessons learned in general, but what's unique about his situation is that his transformation was part of a carve-out. So rather than a merger and acquisition integration, which a lot of our clients are doing, they're trying to pull together multiple parts, disparate processes and business units, trying to pull that all together into a cohesive operating model. He was sort of doing the opposite. He was carving out from a parent company as part of a spinoff, and there were some unique time pressures that he was under to stand up a back office ERP system in a pretty short period. And so he's got some really interesting lessons, even if you're not going through an M&A event or any sort of carve-out. Just the fact that he was under such extreme time pressure to get the project done, and he's got some good lessons there. And then finally, later in the show, we'll have Dave Beldyk, who is a senior manager at Third Stage Consulting, and he recently helped a client that shall remain unnamed. He helped them recover a failing project. So it was a failing digital transformation, big ERP implementation for a global company. Project got off track. They hired us to come in and help them clean it up. And he's got some really good perspective that's a little bit different than the first 3 guests, in that these are sort of the things that have already gone on track and what did you do to fix it. So while the first 3 interviews are more focused on looking back from start to finish, what went well and what didn't, Dave's perspective is more coming into a difficult situation, trying to figure out how to turn it around. So we'll have some good discussion with him, and his interview is actually very, very interesting, and I enjoyed that one very much with him. So before we get to the first guests, though, I want to do something that we started last week, and we had actually done it in one other episode with Paresa before she went on maternity leave. And by the way, she will be back eventually, hopefully here in a few episodes once she's back from maternity leave. So it's me flying solo for the time being. But when Paresa was here, and even last week when I did the first episode without Paresa, one of the things I did that I enjoyed, and I think it added a lot to the discussion, was I pulled up some engagement or some questions that I've engaged in on social media, LinkedIn in particular. If you're not connected with me, be sure to connect, because I constantly post questions and I try to get other people's feedback on different topics on LinkedIn. And one of the recent questions I asked, which got a really good response and had some really interesting responses, was that this question here. And the question is, are most companies unique enough that they should choose technology that is specifically suited to their needs or customized to support those needs, rather than relying on a more generic software package? So, in other words, I'm trying to get to the bottom of, should you pick a technology that you think is the best fit for you and sort of adapt to that technology, or do you get as close as you can and then potentially customize or change the technology to fit the business? So it's really, I'm trying to get into the heart of the whole business versus technology. Who's, which is driving what? Is the business driving the technology, or should the technology be driving the business? And that's a common debate, a common discussion point. I don't know if we'll ever really get a clear resolution to it, but we had some good diverse opinions here. And I want to just dive in a little bit into some of those responses that we had throughout the discussion here in this thread on LinkedIn. So the first comment actually comes from Ron Lehman, who is a industry peer and expert based out of Asia. And he and I have been connected for quite some time, have known each other for several years now. And his comment is a good one, in that he says the following. He says, most companies think they are unique, but if you boil things down to the basics, they are probably not when it comes to applications such as ERP. The issue, I think, that those making the decisions cannot see the wider picture and will tend to play safe when maybe they should be looking at things in a wider context. The selection process needs to be robust and transparent. So, interesting context. I think what he's probably saying, he didn't say these exact words, but I think if you had to pick a side, or if he had to pick a side, he'd probably be on the side of let the technology drive the business and adapt your business to the technology, because chances are you're really not that different when you get down to the core basics of financials and inventory management. One follow-up question I would have on that, which by the way I agree with his points, if we're talking about basic stuff like general ledger, accounts payable, basic inventory management, basic order management, basic CRM, stuff like that. But I guess the question is, when you start getting into some of the nuances of a business, like if you're a construction company and you have some unique project costing needs, or if you have a complex engineer to order manufacturing product that you're providing to your customers, what does that look like? How do you navigate the fact that not all ERP systems, and maybe most ERP systems or enterprise technologies, are not going to be able to address those needs that you have, and you might need to either customize the technology to fit your needs, or you might need a third-party bolt-on, some sort of best-of-breed process. So I think that's where that's the gray area for me. Is I agree with Ron when it comes to the more basic back office functions, but when you start talking about the customer facing or the product facing or the business model specific processes within any organization, how is that going to be different, and how would you navigate that whole business versus technology driven approach? And that is a $1 million question that we constantly are helping clients answer. And it obviously depends on your situation. Some organizations, we find that they're unique in some ways, but 90% of what they do is very common across industries, and when they look at industry peers, it can be very similar. But we want to make sure we differentiate between the things that are actually unique differentiators versus things that are more of a change management symptom, or a lack thereof, or a resistance to change that might cause an organization to want to customize or change their technology to fit their business rather than the other way around. So I think that's the key, is to recognize that there may be things that you may need to customize, but you want to make sure you're not going too far down that slippery slope of giving people an excuse to not change by saying we'll customize the technology, or we'll make it fit for the way you've always done things. So I appreciate Ron's feedback there, and just I wanted to add a caveat to that, or maybe a counterpoint to what Ron said there, although I agree with what he said in the caveats that he provided. Another comment here is from Akil Ashik, and he's the CEO and director of a company called Driver Logistics, a third-party logistics company, and his comment was the following: I think a lot of things can be standard, and I believe you need a mix of both generic and custom technology tools. I think that's well put. I think most organizations find that to be true. We certainly find that to be true for most of our clients. And the caveat or the disclaimer, I guess I would throw in there, is that yes, you probably do need a combination of both, the generic vanilla off-the-shelf technology as well as some custom technology. But again, you don't want to go so far down the path of custom technology because your people are resisting change or your organization's resisting change. And you certainly don't want to do that if there's something off the shelf that would work just as well. You certainly don't want to give up your competitive advantages or the things that make you unique from a competitive and a strategic perspective, but you also don't want to be going so far down the path that you're customizing or recreating the wheel on things you don't need to. So it's a slippery slope. It's a gray area. It's a difficult fine line to walk. It's a difficult tightrope, but those are some of the challenges that organizations need to balance. Another comment here is from Dennis Anthony. His comment is the following: I think choose the technology and then customize to support those needs. Very well put. That's a good general rule of thumb, is go in with the goal of finding a single system to do everything you want perfectly, even though you're not going to find it. You're not going to find a technology that can do everything you want perfectly, but get as close as you can. Maybe you get 80% or 85, 90% of the way there, and then that way you can really isolate and limit the customization to those areas where you weren't able to get 100% of the way there. And again, it comes down to the fact that you're not going to get 100% of the way there, and it's important to have that realistic expectation that you are probably going to have to either customize something or water down your processes if need be, or find some sort of third-party bolt-on or some combination of all the above. But the key is to really get as close as you can and then focus on what to do about those exceptions, because those exceptions and that little sliver of difference between perfection and as close as you can get to perfection, that gap right there is going to be the risk and the thing that drives your timeline and your cost and your overall risk profile. And your ability to effectively navigate those challenges is going to determine how successful you ultimately are. And if something's going to derail the project, chances are it's probably going to have something to do with those gaps between sort of that perfect state scenario versus what technology can actually do for you. Another comment here is from Demetrio Santana, and his comment says, it's a good thread of discussion here. I'm leaning toward every company is unique in needing a specific set of software and processes, but it's balanced against what is viable without slowing down progress. There isn't really a final destination when it comes to digital transformation, so constant adapting is needed, and that's where the flexibility of off-the-shelf systems comes in handy. So very good point there. I agree with that. I think there's, again, the leaning towards the idea of finding off-the-shelf or getting as close to off-the-shelf as you can, and then finding ways to adapt and tweak and fine-tune technology either through bolt-ons or customization or some adjustment to the overall technology landscape can be a great way to get you there. And then the last comment I'll share that I thought was interesting, they're all interesting, but these are just some of the highlights. This one is from Sunim Furtis, and I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, Sunim Furtis. He said, every company must choose the software on the basis of their needs and requirements, so there will be no burden of the modules, and also customized software will be cost effective as well. That is the beauty of ERP software. So I think that's a good point too. It does give you a platform to have off-the-shelf software, sort of your more vanilla capability for back office functions and the more commodity-based business processes. But the better ERP systems also give you a platform to do other things. So you could either customize or integrate to other third-party systems. A good example of that is you look at Oracle's Fusion, ERP Cloud, whatever they're calling it now. I think they're calling it a combination of all the above. But Oracle's flagship ERP product, as well as Microsoft Dynamics 365. Those are two products, better known ERP products, that are not only good at providing vanilla off-the-shelf capability, but they also provide you a platform that makes it easier to configure and integrate and also customize if you need to. So you have to look at not just what can the software do off the shelf, but how easy is it going to be, or how difficult is it going to be, depending on what software you're looking at, to either integrate or customize the software. And if you're in a type of industry like, say, either healthcare or biotech, pharmaceutical, one of those types of organizations where you know you're going to have regulatory systems that have to remain in place, like in pharmaceuticals, for example, you have the laboratory information management systems, or in the cannabis space, there's some, in the United States, there's some federally regulated systems that need to be used to track the sale of cannabis-based products. So you know you're going to have some sort of third-party systems that you're going to have to integrate to, even if you had an ERP system that could do that same thing. So you want to make sure you find a platform that can address all the other needs you have, but also be able to integrate with those third-party systems. So those are some great points there, and I appreciate all the feedback we've gotten from different people that I'm connected to on LinkedIn. And again, if we're not connected on LinkedIn, be sure to send me an invite or follow me on LinkedIn and be part of the conversation. I'd love to give you a shout out and quote you on a future show. And by the way, before we take a break here and come back to the first segment of our Best of Greatest Hits episode, if you're interested in the topics we're talking about here today, including that thread we just talked about whether you should use vanilla off-the-shelf software or whether you should customize or whether it's some combination of all the above or some sort of hybrid, I encourage you to join us at Digital Stratosphere, which is actually happening next week. If you're listening to this live in April of 2021, the week of April 20th. So April 20, 21, 22, we're doing a 3-day virtual conference called Digital Stratosphere. It's all about digital transformation best practices, 3 days of keynotes and workshops and breakout sessions. I'll be speaking in several of the sessions, as well as others on our team and clients and others from the industry. So I highly encourage you to check that out. Day one of the conference, the first day of keynotes, is actually free of charge to the public. So I encourage you to register. There's no charge for that. If you decide to attend all 3 days, we've extended a deep discount in recognition or in celebration of our 3-year anniversary as a company. It's our third year of being in business at third stage. April of 2018 is when I started the company, so we're doing tying it into our 3-year anniversary. So I encourage you to register. I've included a link below, or you can go to just stratosphere2021.com to see the agenda and register for it there. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk to Rob Taylor, who's the Director of IT at Sight and Sound Theaters, a mid-size entertainment and retail organization based out of the United States. He's going to talk to us about his digital transformation and lessons learned. I'm going to play you back that clip from early in Season 1 of Transformation Ground Control. You are listening to Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling. We'll be right back. Are you ready for transformation in 2021? Are you ready for change? Well, we want to help ensure that you're ready at Digital Stratosphere on April 20 through April 22nd. Digital Stratosphere is the only technology agnostic event of its kind, and we're bringing it to you digitally. This unique event is intended for anyone about to go through any sort of transformation, whether it be a digital transformation or a business transformation. This event is going to cover topics from experts ranging from strategy to planning, to program management, to change management, to technology, everything you need to know to make your transformation successful in 2021 and beyond. And if you're one of the over 1,000 people that attended one of our past Digital Stratosphere events, this one promises to be bigger, better, and even more stratospheric. And the best part is that because this event coincides with Third Stage's 3-year anniversary, we're providing the first day of keynote sessions to you with no registration fee. And if you would like to attend all 3 days of the conference, we've provided deep discounts to celebrate our 3-year anniversary. So bring your entire team to Digital Stratosphere and get ready for transformation. Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. This is the greatest hits or the best of season 1 of our podcast. We go live every Wednesday on YouTube. We premiere on all the podcast platforms like Spotify, Google, Pandora, Apple Podcast, all the usual suspects. Please subscribe to us if you haven't already, and give us a rating or a review. I'd love to see any sort of rating or review you have on the podcast platform or you're watching on and or on YouTube. If you're watching it there. And certainly please share this with colleagues and friends and others that you think might find value in this. This is going to be the first segment of what promises to be an epic episode of Transformation Ground Control with 4 of the best interviews we've had throughout season 1 so far. And this next one is Rob Taylor, who's a good friend, who's been a client of ours since actually before Third Stage started. They're a client that predates even the formation of the company. So it's someone that I know well, and it's an organization I know well, and we've worked with them for quite some time on their transformation journey here over the last few years. And Rob has a really interesting background. I love doing this interview with him because he's a very smart, knowledgeable guy, and he also has a very interesting personal background. He works for a faith-based organization. Prior to earlier in his life, I should say, or earlier in his career, he was a lead singer of a rock and roll band, which I find intriguing since I'm fascinated by rock and roll and rock stars and lead singers and that sort of thing in general. So great conversation. Rob, thanks for being on the show today.
Yeah, great to have some time with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Good to have you here. So I guess before we get started, I wanted to, we're going to dive into your digital transformation and enterprise software experience at Sight and Sound. And I want to ask you a quick question here in a second about Sight and Sound and give us an overview. But before we do that, one interesting personal story that you have is that you used to be in a rock and roll band, which you listeners and people that know me, and I know you know this about me, I love rock and roll and music and have a strong music connection, but you do as well. So tell us a little bit about your rock and roll history in your past.
Yeah, I sung from high school and always, I think, to be honest, in high school, they asked that question, what do you want to be kind of thing. And my answer at the time was rock and roll, singer, so leading a band. And so went through a variation of different things. I grew up in New Zealand, so was around the era of NXS and different bands like that. Obviously AC/DC across the pond from Australia. And then ended up moving to the UK and ended up in a band in London. That was probably the most predominant venture I was involved in. So the band was called Maverick, and we just played the circuit in London. And yeah, it's great fun. I got to say, music is, once it's in you, it's in you. I still love those dirty guitar sounds even today. So
yeah,
still very much part of life. Yeah.
Good. I'm sure it takes you back to the rock and roll days, and in some ways you still are a rock star. It's just in a different capacity, in a different setting here.
Yeah, it's a different look as well. It's like, you see things happen and change over time, and you look back and you're like, was that me?
Yeah. Now you said you have a picture of your band back. When was this?
I do, yes. So this is Maverick. I need to line that up with the camera actually, but so that's me leaning with my back against the wall there.
With the cool shades on?
That would have been circa 94.
94, okay.
Yeah, so that was when we were in London. So.
Wow. Well, that's I can honestly say I don't know any other IT directors / CIO types that have been actual rock stars in the past. People use that term loosely nowadays, like, hey, he's a rock star in his industry or whatever, but You actually were a rock star and still are, so that's great.
So. I appreciate the comment for sure.
Absolutely. Well, so Rob, you and I have known each other for several years now. You're a client of ours. We've done some work together. And I guess to start, before we dive into your transformation at Sight and Sound Theaters, maybe you could just tell us a little bit. In the introduction to you, I talked a little bit about Sight and Sound, but maybe in your own words, just describe a little bit more about Sight and Sound and your mission and purpose, a little bit about the organization itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I came into Sight and Sound back in August of 2015. And Sight and Sound is a really well-known entity. Started literally from a couple who had a real passion to tell stories on a grand scale. and has over, I think we're in our 43rd, if not 44th year. I think 43rd might have been 2020. So it sort of skipped by. But yeah, telling stories, we basically tell Bible stories on an epic scale. So we have 2 theaters, one in Branson, Missouri, and one here in Lancaster, PA. And they're both a little over 2,000 seats in each theater. And because we're in the locations we are, we have no space limitations, much like you would see at, whether the West End or Broadway. Very restricted in terms of what capacity they have to store large set pieces and that type of thing. So this organization, basically Sight and Sound, builds out everything pretty much that we put on stage. We have a 100-foot stage that has a 35-foot trim, and we essentially wrap around the theater with 80 feet of side stage on either side. We have live animals in our shows. The 2 words that we associate with our shows are basically epic and immersive. Stuff will literally, come down out of the ceiling during the course of different scenes. We've had a full-size inflatable whale in our show for the story of Jonah that is brought out over the heads of the audience, and it's in a scene where essentially the entire audience and the theater goes underwater. So yeah, just pushing the edge when it comes to technology. We've been compared somewhat to Disney and those types of spaces, but when it comes to live theater, I think in truth, the more I've been involved in different industry conversations and different industry meetings, it's hard to find a comparable theater that does what we do on the scale that we do it. So yeah, it's pretty cool to be involved.
And when you first reached out to us and when we first talked, I remember when I first heard of Sight and Sound, in my mind, I think, okay, this is a cute little church production type of thing where people's kids are up there acting. But you mentioned the word Disney-like production in it, and I've seen a few of your shows, and it really is epic. The production value is incredible. I mean, it is unlike anything I've ever seen. Whether faith-based or not, even if you just look at even some of the non-faith-based stuff that's out there, I've never seen anything like it. So it seems like your secret sauce is the actual owning that production, and you really you create everything yourself, like you said. I think that's a pretty amazing feat that you accomplished.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, that's exactly what we're going for. So thanks.
Sure, absolutely. So what about what was it that led you when you joined in 2015? What led you to the conclusion, or what was that tipping point that led you to say, hey, we need to really rethink our systems and go through some sort of transformation? What triggered that?
It really was the state of where I came in. So what had happened as an organization was we had actually 3 senior leaders in the IT department left in 2014, not through any specific reason other than just certain things that came up in their own lives, opportunities. And I think to that point, there had been a lot of, the approach had been more around a background of programming, and within reason, there was this thought that, hey, we can write these programs, so let's just go ahead and build them. So we had built out a point of sale system. We had a homegrown employee management system. Just a lot of products that when I walked in the door, I'm like, okay, if we reassess our actual capabilities as a team, and we're an organization of 600 employees and an IT team of 14, and so just trying to, scale things correctly, I just felt like we had far too much technical debt for the products that we were supporting. And realistically, we were just scrambling. I just didn't see an opportunity for us to get ahead. Our development team is obviously a segment of the 14. So, we're talking about 4 people. And for them to keep up with things, just pretty much impossible. So I think it really spun up very quickly into a conversation about how do we take the mainstream business functional software solutions and get them as off-the-shelf products that someone else is supporting and, adding features to, and that it's their discipline to manage that type of product. And that way we can take our energy and our expertise and start to move towards the departments that really need a more, something that's basically giving us competitive edge performance internally, and make sure that our development efforts are really spent around something that's giving us a not only competitive advantage from the point of view in terms of functionality, but really enhancing the workflow and the capability of our teams. Efficiencies are only really gained, I guess, in my mind at least anyway, in terms of you either enhance speed or you enhance the process. And so, with those two things in mind, it just really felt like we needed to take what our development team was doing out here and hone it in with a very distinct focus. And to do that, we really acknowledged that, okay, a lot of these other functionalities then need to be handled by a different solution. So we started on that journey of what is that solution?
Right. Now, if we break that up into sort of two major phases, one being, that definition of what the solution is and how you're going to move forward. Second phase being how do we execute and implement. Starting in that first phase, how did you get started? What did you do to, define your needs? What did you end up choosing? What path did you end up choosing to go down?
Sure. So we formed a small team. We wanted to be agile, so there were just 4 of us initially. And really, I think at that point, we just all independently started doing research and really looking around and just, turning over the rocks to see what we could find. We acknowledged fairly early on that none of us around the table had walked through an ERP implementation. And so we recognized very quickly that we would need, external expertise. And as a part of our early research, we started looking at, who would that be and who were the players who had the reputation and who had the strength to, come alongside and really help us through it. So we actually ended up getting down to a short list of you and your team, essentially at that time, and Gartner. I think one of the things, I will say this, one of the things that we recognize being a mid-sized company is that as part of our evolution, when you transition over a period of, let's say, 20, 30 years from a small, fairly within reason garage style business, or I have to say that garage, sorry.
Right. Car park, is that what you're saying?
Car park, yeah. So that kind of transition of just the growth, and when you build into that space where you are now in a mid-sized enterprise, the transition that happens and really the change, the transformation that happens internally as an organization helps you. If you're aware of it, at least you start to recognize and realize, okay, we need a specific approach to understand where we are relative to where we've been. And I think what also happened around that time is, as a team, we started to recognize that, we have been dealing with very much a mindset historically of small business that led us to always engage with small business partners within reason. And so we recognized like we need to make this leap over that sort of small to medium bridge, and actually recognized within reason, we were like, okay, well, maybe we'll go a little further. And that's why we reached out to Gartner, and, within reason in our research, you and your team came up. And we recognized pretty quickly that, you guys were operating at a global level, at a broad enterprise level. And, we acknowledged, okay, maybe that's a little bigger than we are, and within reason, maybe more than we need. But I think we married that with, the reality that we didn't want to be approaching it with the wrong mindset. We wanted to make sure that we were looking to the future and looking to building a structure and bringing in an ERP solution that truly was going to hold us in good stead for the opportunities coming down the road. And I think that really has, in truth, I would say today that served us well, in that we're, unfortunately, where we are, we're currently paused, but we were very close to, before COVID, very close to implementing Dynamics 365.
Right. Now, speaking of Dynamics 365 for Microsoft, and for those listening that don't know what that is, it's a common enterprise business technology that a lot of organizations use, especially in the small, and I'd say even more so in the mid-market. What was it that led you to decide that the Dynamics 365 was the right solution compared to other options that you had out there?
Well, we engaged, we essentially went through that process of determining who our partner would be, and we engaged you and your team at that time, and really just started the exercise of walking through requirements gathering and, getting to the place where you've got a long list of possibles and working through, which ones of these slim down and get to a short list, and that entire process that you walked us through. And I think really what we came out with is we ended up with 3 opportunities. I don't know if you need names, but we ended up with Microsoft Dynamics, obviously. There was NetSuite and SAP. One of their products ended up on that short list. And I think we felt really good about each of those products. And so we started to dig, as you do, look a little more under the hood and getting some demos and that type of thing, and engaging with the VARs that deal with these solutions. And we essentially walked that process out with you and your team and ended up with a place where you came back with a recommendation. And I think, it was unique in some ways, in the sense that obviously you did recommend a different product, but you made a very strong acknowledgement at the time that, there really were 2 of those 3 that were neck and neck. And I think, we're a faith-based organization, so we wanted to take some time and basically sort of, settle back and just make sure we were hearing what we felt was the right decision for us, and really take some time to sort of meditate that through and just, let it settle with us and have peace about it. And what happened in the course of that time was we sort of switched gears and we looked at that second option, and which was Dynamics. And because we at the time were pretty heavily invested, like we are a fairly strong Microsoft shop in the corporate side. We're Office 365 deployed. We running Windows 10, pretty early adoption around the Windows 10 across the organization. And so we just really felt like the synergies that we saw were likely to lead to pretty big payoffs. And so that was the final decision. We landed that after a period of time, and then really just started to look at, okay, how do we get into planning and the process of implementation.
Right. Well, good. Well, that's a good overview. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I'm going to ask you more implementation and execution related questions. So after we get past the evaluation, you decide on D365, then what next? So we're going to cover that what next here when we come back from a quick break. We're here with Rob Taylor from Sight and Sound, and you're listening to Transformation Ground Control. We'll be right back.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
All right, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Rob Taylor from Sight and Sound Theaters. And Rob, before the break, we were talking about the journey you went through to get to the realization that you needed to make a change with your technologies to really get to that next level of being a full, mid-sized company, as well as how you selected the specific technology that you're going to deploy. But one of the interesting things that we observed in working with you is that midstream, in the middle of the project, you had a new executive sponsor come in. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about her role. And the reason I am asking you in particular is because I would consider her a non-traditional executive sponsor, but in a very highly effective way. She has more of a business background, not as much of an IT and technical background, had never been through a big technical transformation like the ones that you were about to go through, yet she came in as the executive sponsor. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about that, what her impact was and how it affected the project from a executive sponsorship and leadership perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know I referred earlier to the team of 4 that we, kind of walked through that early process. The reality is, just over a period, I want to say it was probably close to 3 years, we were walking through that process in different stages. We did end up in a place where a couple of the folks on that team ended up leaving the company. So, I would actually say the person you're referring to is Sarah Murphy, who is our VP of Brand Development. And she came in and within reason was sort of handed this, hey, here's a great opportunity. Very, you pinned it correctly. Like, her background was definitely sort of brand and marketing, and really, very, very little technical, kind of always just, partnering with technical leads. And so I think I would say now that we've, gone through the last couple of years and sort of walking towards this process of implementation, I would say her feedback around it has been that it's very beneficial to her at that time. It felt, I'm sure at the time, like being thrown, in the deep end. But yeah, she very much looks back and just says, like, overseeing the project, it's one of those things when you're overseeing a project and you are that executive sponsor, you are sitting in a very defined specific seat. It's not like you're being asked to be technical. You're really just, gathering the right folks around you to see this thing play out. And so, I think it was a very good relationship. We formed very quickly a great relationship around, it's a mutual goal. Like, everybody around the table has this mutual goal that the company is going to benefit from this product. How do we align our processes to be at an optimal state so that when we move towards this product, we're getting the best possible use out of this product, and every advantage that is possible can be gained. So overall, I think it's definitely been a great exercise for everybody involved. We were in that strange spot, like I'm sure so many others, where we had a June 1st stand-up date on the calendar, and we were actually trending under budget and on time to stand up the core financials component of Dynamics 365. Now, I do want to mention too that we had one of the things that attracted us to Dynamics 365 was potentially its ability to stand up in a modular fashion. So you can stand up the different modules without actually having to do a complete sort of end-to-end implementation cycle. And because of that, the first module we actually took on was our point of sale solution. The point of sale solution was a homegrown solution, and it just gave us an opportunity to move towards that fairly easily. So the very first module we took on was POS, and we took that on, I'm trying to think when it was date-wise. I want to say at the end of 18. And then we had that stood up by, yes, it was. And so it was stood up, actually, we had originally a goal of March of 19, but we ended up standing that up. There was, I want to say, 30 or 45 days late for different reasons. It's not that unusual, obviously, in this process. But yeah, we stood that product up in early 19 and then moved towards the core financials module as the secondary.
Right. Yeah. And I know when you were looking at, when we were helping you through that evaluation, and SAP and NetSuite were the two that you didn't end up choosing, and with the benefit of hindsight and really looking at how this transformation has evolved so far, you look at how D365 has provided a certain amount of flexibility that I think has probably benefited you in terms of the fact that you do everything from, your typical financial transactions and accounting and inventory management, but then you've also got project management. And I know you have a third party, I can't remember if it's homegrown or a third party system, the Showtix system.
Yep, it's ticketing software, yep.
So you had a lot of different, I'd consider fairly unique needs, especially if you're not in entertainment and theater, live event industry. So has that been the case where D365 has given you that flexibility to be able to integrate with the ticketing system and your POS and all the different pieces that you need to tie together to make the organization cohesive?
Yeah, I mean, we are in that, again, like so many others, we are in that strange spot right now where what we thought was going to be a certain window of time with, you've got that typical, you're in your current solutions, they are integrated to whatever degree, and then you've got to try and sort of time out, okay, when we introduce this next new step, how do we, backwards integrate essentially if we're keeping an older product over a transition period. So you've got to kind of work out that window of, okay, we've got to make this sort of connection. We're either using an API or we're doing some kind of unique integration programming. And we're kind of stuck in that place. So we're stuck in that place where basically Dynamics Financial is not implemented. And so we're still in a place where our old ticketing solution, along with our old accounting software, is still functioning the way it always has. We introduced the POS system, so that part of Dynamics is definitely in play. And then, I haven't mentioned it, and I should have probably, but at the same time as we took on the Dynamics implementation for core financials, we actually looked at our Showtix, which is our ticketing software, as you mentioned. It really functions today as our CRM and ticketing software in one bundle, and it is a homegrown solution. We actually looked and said, we want to revamp that solution as well. And because we were looking at the track of Dynamics, it felt like it's a big job to take on two major projects like this at the same time, but what it felt like was a good synergy so that we could potentially land at the place where both of these new solutions stood up together. And so that we could timeline them in such a way that, either they overlap by a couple of months, but we've, got a very clean path towards how they're going to integrate. Or we try to stand them up within a week, if it, something close. So we kind of looked at those different options as well. And so when COVID hit, we literally paused both of those projects. And so we were done very close to wrapping up with the UX UI design elements of our Showtix and ticketing project and software, working with an external partner to go through that UX UI process and really refine the product as it is. Our current product, just for context, was built back in 2003 and has not had a major iteration since. It's just been, essentially featured, developed ever since. And so, I think we actually ended up going back to, in the first month of quarantine, ended up going back to that partner and spent a few more hours with them literally just to finish off because we were that close finishing UX UI. So right now we're kind of holding the UX UI development or design pieces. All that documentation is gathered, the wireframes are built, and everything's sitting there waiting to go. And the work that we've been able to do with the development team since has purely been back office, getting prepped with the way those integrations will happen, the way that they'll integrate with, we basically have our website traffic and our website transactions are flowing through that software. So, I've been doing some sort of behind the scenes work ever since, but at some point here that will spin back up into very much the front end development of all the work that we've done so far around documentation. So that will coincide, and our hope is obviously, at a certain point there too, yes, we'll have Dynamics come in and then basically Showtix will come in right behind that. So we'll end up with two new solutions evolving away from the older ones. And it's definitely a process to do that. The integration pieces are definitely key, and obviously APIs weren't around in 2003. The concept of them the way they are seen today. So they definitely offer a lot more flexibility today than you would typically just have to write line code back then to make things integrate. So
right, yeah, that's interesting. And one thing I want to, before I ask the next question, I want to circle back and close the loop on one general observation I had around the executive sponsorship, the executive team. You talked about how Sarah had more of a branding background, not so much a technical background. But one thing I found extremely powerful and effective that most organizations don't have that we work with is the fact that, first of all, you paired someone who really understood the strategic business side of things with someone like yourself who not only understood the business side, but also understood the technology side. And combining those two skill sets, if you will, I think in a lot of ways seemed to take some pressure off you, to where it wasn't just an IT project or a technical initiative. It was more of a, how are we going to change the business and make the business more effective? The other thing that holds true, I'd say, for you, Sarah, and others that we worked with, and I think it's a core part of your culture as an organization, is that you're a very humble organization. So you knew you knew what you knew and you knew what you didn't know, or at least you knew when to ask for help or where to ask questions. And I think that was something that has served you very well so far, is that you knew what you were good at and you knew what you weren't good at. And I think a lot of organizations miss that. And that's a really important nuance that you guys had.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I would agree, definitely. And actually, I would say this too, in response to the first point you brought up there. That was actually advice we got from you in the early stages. And when I came out and did your boot camp in Chicago in the early stages of our discovery and research. And I think, took away so many things from that time. The amount of stuff you pack into a couple of days is quite incredible. But just so much, just really accelerated my understanding of what we were walking towards. And one of the things that was a real key point that, I think in truth was what we experienced and held on to pretty strongly, was that this is a business initiative. It is not an IT initiative. That was one of those statements that you made very early on, and you kind of reiterated it, several times throughout the weekend when I was there in Chicago. And I clung on to that because the reality is, I think anybody that's lived in the technology sphere understands that, when stuff breaks or stuff doesn't work, the first people they get called are IT. And, rightly so. I mean, it's the end of the day, that's what we're here for. But to understand the gravity of what a business initiative is versus just an IT initiative really helped us contextualize what it is we're doing. And I think that understanding, we've really continued to meaningfully communicate that. And I think it really has helped with the way that people are supporting, the Dynamics implementation to this point, and, continue to do so. And, our hope would be that, as a business, we're able to acknowledge, here's the gains, here's the benefits, here's, where we're able to actually manage and measure the ROI. We really want to, again, follow through, like so many businesses. You talked about that. A lot of businesses never get to measure the ROI on these projects because of exhaustion. And, I think we're very mindful of, like you said, again, just this is not our expertise. And we want to make sure that when we're listening to voices like yours who have been in the industry, we're taking note of the key elements that you raise, and not just taking, notes in a meeting and then sort of putting them all in a binder somewhere, but taking them and adopting them meaningfully. We are, I thank you for the acknowledgement, but we are very appreciative of our internal culture. We really, really love, who we are as an organization, and we spend a lot of energy and a lot of time around feeding that culture and really strengthening it. And so we really, we look to truly, as a leadership team, be bringing benefits that can be felt and truly impact people's roles, in the day-to-day. So
right.
That communication is super important. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, and as I think back to the journey you've been through so far, and that we've been with you so far, you think back to what if you had gone down one of those other paths, with SAP or NetSuite, and when you look back to your culture, I feel like that might have broken the culture a bit. If you suddenly didn't have that flexibility and that, ability to preserve that culture and just way of operating and all that good stuff. So you mentioned ROI and benefits. What are some of the benefits that you're either seeing so far in your journey, or the ones that you are anticipating, just at a high level? I'm sure there's a lot, but what are some of the low-hanging fruit ones that come to mind?
Sure. I think obviously the first piece is the POS solution that we currently have up and running. Our POS solution has definitely served us really well since we implemented. We did work with the VAR at the time that we had was, I'm trying to think who they were now. I don't know that I'm going to recall. But so I mean, we did get some really good folks with that team. So just wanted to acknowledge, that it was a good experience in certain areas, and challenging in others. And I don't know that is ever unusual. I think there's always elements where there's great moments, and there's other days where it's like no. But overall, our POS solution has been really great, and again, just going strong today. It's implemented in both our locations. We have lobby environments basically where we sell both merchandise in person, and then with COVID, we've been able to scale really well and be able to basically offer more things on our website, and really a lot of, I think, where those ROI moments have been because of COVID. Maybe again like so many others, where it's like certain things that we had in place enabled us to move and pivot quickly to respond. And it's been great to really have that flexibility with that product. One of the other things that happened during the course of that journey is we actually then looked at the transactional process around receiving credit card payment. And we were managing, again, within IT, there'd just been a history of us managing every single step of that. So we literally were engaged with a payment process. So we were engaged with, a specific company around the terminals. And then we were engaged with all the pieces of putting all those transactional steps together, which, it's detailed for anyone who's ever taken it on if you do the minutia. And again, just sort of stepping back and looking and saying, we don't need to be managing this. Like, this costs us way too much time for the fact that we know there's expertise out there that does this and bundles it essentially together and takes care of it. So we've actually since transitioned to using Adyen. So Adyen actually manage our point of sale environment. We have brand new terminals there, and it's literally an end-to-end solution. So it's just fabulous. Like, we literally don't have to touch a lot of that stuff anymore. So yeah, the return there has just been amazing. Like, it just literally gives our ops team, which is essentially our system administrators and our help desk team, just gives them time back. And along with that, we're just a more streamlined process that really, from the point of view of, we can take now, all our terminals are basically touch friendly, they're chip friendly, all of those options are available to us today. And we just didn't have that, prior to, I want to say, about 12 months ago. So yeah, that move was great. And then I think the things we're anticipating with the core financials, honestly, a bunch of things. We've never had a full-blown purpose-built budgeting process in terms of a software solution. We use essentially a highly developed Excel spreadsheet solution today, and there's obviously limitations with that when you're trying to budget for an organization our size. And so a lot of anticipation about getting into a budgeting solution that will really be able to help us hone that process. One of the other things is asset management. Did not, again, have an asset management solution in place, but very quickly able to spin that up and moving towards that, really anticipating that being helpful as well. We do have a lot of assets we keep track of. Our shows essentially are treated like a product. And so there's a lot of, the assets really are the costumes that we create, the props, the sets, all of those items that go with a show, and then basically are accounted for over the course of the show run, which for us will be a year in Pennsylvania, and then the show moves to our Branson Theater and runs for a year there. So over the course of that time, accounting is keeping track of all of that and doing the amortizing and all that type of stuff. So yeah, those sorts of tools, we really anticipate, giving them a lot of time back just from a, raw manual process to be able to, drop into a system and just see the system do a lot of that calculation. So.
Right. Good. So just as a closing comment, or maybe just to tie this all together, when you think about the journey you've been on so far, you look at the benefits you've realized and the ROI you're aiming for, you look at the challenges and the hiccups that you've experienced along the way. So the good, the bad, the ugly, when you take all that into account, if you had to summarize just a handful of things that you would recommend to someone who's about to start this sort of journey, what are some of those takeaways that you wish you would have known back in 2015, 2016 when you first started this whole journey?
Right. I think it's like you said, it's really important that as an organization you are truly honest with yourselves. And yeah, I think our acknowledgement of where our strengths were and just acknowledging the gaps that we had, not trying to fill them, not sort of blustering our way through, but truly just acknowledging, like, we need help and we need to ask and find the right people to walk through this with us. I think that really served us well. I think, the one thing I very much appreciate about you and your organization is that our ability to have meaningful conversation with you throughout the journey. I remember, we were on calls every few months kind of talking about, hey, like, it feels like we've got our arms around this piece now, so within reason, we don't necessarily maybe need the same level of engagement from your consultants and different parts of the team. And just your willingness as much as anything. I really felt like that synergy was great because we were, it's almost like that wedge. I don't know if I can demonstrate it visually or not, but it's like that wedge situation where you start out with, we had a large gap of a lack, well, I don't know how to do this right. I don't have a whiteboard, but it's like you came in with a great strength where we had a weakness.
Right.
And within reason, over time, our weakness was growing, and we needed within reason less of your strength because our strength was growing. And so I think that synergy is something I definitely encourage companies to be aware of. Like when you start out, and even as we were going through the proposal process with you and talking through what would this look like, your methodology laid out things so well that I think it helped us sort of just look for those milestones of, hey, we're going to be looking at a check-in, excuse me, we're going to be looking at a check-in every quarter. And that check-in is not just, hey, how are we doing, but, hey, how are we doing, and do we need to realign? And I think that, as much as anything, is just, that's something that we've experienced. And, when it came down all the way through to core financials, like with POS, we used a VAR. And then, excuse me, don't have anything to drink. I'm sorry.
Right.
But when we approached core financials, we started to realize that, hey, like a lot of this skill set is actually internal now. And because you'd walked us through so much of the process element, we felt like we had a really good grasp of that as well. So we took on we kind of surprised our VAR, honestly. They were, I think, anticipating, walking through the next module with us. But what we actually did was we went to a very hybrid model, and we ended up going to Nigel Frank, which, again, is a very well-known name in this industry. And essentially, we engaged with some independent consultants to do the finance-specific piece, a solutions architect role, and at one point, at least, the procurement module, which is obviously, wrapped in core financials. And those independent consultants, along with, within reason, lessened, reliance on your consultancy and your team, it just kind of all merged together in this hybrid thing that really served us well. And like I said, we were coming, 3 months shy, essentially, when things blew up in March, 3 months shy of, coming in under budget and being on point to have the solution in place. So I think just the willingness to be truthful with yourself, and then also be willing to acknowledge that you will grow throughout the process and find that partner that will grow with you and not hold you to rigidity in their own functionality that then potentially could become a cost problem in the long term.
That's a great takeaway, and I appreciate the compliments there with our team. And I think the big takeaway that I get from this, if I could summarize or maybe paraphrase, is just I think organizations that learn how to be self-sufficient sooner are going to be more successful, and they're going to be happier because they're not paying more than they should be, and they're not overly dependent in this unhealthy relationship with their consultants to where they need the consultants. And as much as we all want to feel needed, we don't want to feel needed years into a process like this. I mean, At some point we've got to make you guys self-sufficient to where you can own it and that sort of thing. So I think that's a really good takeaway. Well, good. Well, thanks for joining us today, Rob. Really appreciate it. Enjoy catching up with you again and hearing some of the stories of where you are today, some of the battle wounds, the good, the bad, the ugly, and all that good stuff. I appreciate you being here. And I encourage everyone to check out Sight and Sound if you're ever in the Pennsylvania area in the United States or in Branson, Missouri in the United States. It's an unbelievable experience. So really hope you guys can check it out. And thanks again for being here, Rob.
No, thanks very much. Appreciate you having me. And thanks again.
You bet. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more guests and more content on Transformation Ground Control. We'll be right back.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology-agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello and welcome back to the Best of Transformation Ground Control Season 1. We just finished up the interview replay of Rob Taylor from Sight and Sound Theaters. He talked about some of the lessons from his transformation, mid-size organization that implemented Microsoft Dynamics 365. And good discussion, great topic. I love talking to Rob. He always has good insights. He's a very knowledgeable and friendly person, a great person to have on the show and a great friend of the company. So I appreciate Rob being here. Now I want to shift gears and provide another client case study that is totally different company, different industry, different company size, different type of technology they were implementing, different set of challenges, a lot of similarities. You'll hear some similarities between this discussion and the one we just had. But this interview is with Tarak Patel, who is a VIP, he is a VIP, but he's the VP of IT at a beverage manufacturer which makes wines and alcohol. They're based in the United States, but they have global operations, pretty well-known brand. And they recently went through a digital transformation journey, which started with an evaluation of potential ERP systems and ended with the actual transformation itself. So we want to jump in and talk about some of the different nuances and the challenges and the lessons learned that Tarak had from this experience. And we had a great interview with them, and we're going to jump right to it. So Tarak, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Appreciate having you here today. So you've recently been involved in a large transformation of sorts, one of the more complex ones, I would say, in the world. But maybe just to start out, tell us a little bit about your company, what you guys do, how many employees you have, that sort of thing.
Yeah, sure. So we are a company based in alcobev space. We make alcohol and beverage products, roughly about 5,000 plus employees. One of the bigger one out there in the market from an alcobev perspective. Company is very well positioned for growth and was the case when we started the journey. However, when you think about the process and technology landscape, was fairly aged. No longer the case, but when we started the journey, right, think of it as 15 to 20-year-old technology and process landscape that was implemented, when company operated with less than 200 SKUs, right? And in this day and age, we were operating it with thousands of SKUs, had a very strong ambition to double the size of the company or grow the revenue aggressively. And it was becoming very clear at the time that the only way to do that is to sell something we don't sell or sell somewhere or to someone that we don't sell, right? So the company has a very high market share in the US. So it was very evident that the growth was going to come through, topics like M&A, global expansions, which in sense requires tremendous amount of flexibility, scale, and agility in your operating model. You need to be able to sell things that you don't sell to locations you don't sell into. You need to buy anything from anywhere. You need to make anything anywhere and sell anything anywhere, right? And that type of growth trajectory was really hindered from speed and cost perspective had we continued to operate on the old technology and process landscape.
Sure. Okay. And was there any sort of tipping point that you reached in your journey there that I'm sure it didn't just happen overnight, but was there anything that triggered you to say, hey, it's time for us to go revisit our landscape and really build in that agility and update our technology and all the stuff you just mentioned?
Yeah, well said, right? So there were really two tipping points from what I can see, right? The one was very evident. Technology was a tipping point. We used to operate on JD Edwards that was implemented in early 90s, still on AS400 landscape. And, if I use this a lot in my analogy, but that system had 2 million lines of custom codes that was built over time, right? It was very customized, and it became evident that at one point in time, if we needed to switch a hardware, we were looking for it on eBay. So it was really difficult to maintain, not just difficult, very high risk to maintain the size of the business on that type of a platform, let alone put another layer of ambition to scale and grow that business, right? So that was a big factor. And as I said, the second factor was just the fact that business would go through a transition of co-manufacturing model or a tolling model, and people would operate that on pen and paper. It will take 6 to 9 months for processing systems to catch up, right? So we were really in a place where business was moving at a much faster pace than the whole process and technology landscape can keep up with.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like a good problem to have as an organization, but still a problem. It's an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely right. I say this a lot that for us, we did this at the time of growth, right? Which is a good time for companies to really look into this. We didn't do this at the time of hardship. We did this transformation at the time of growth. And it's kind of like, some of the East Coast folks will use this phrase, right? We changed the roof while sun was shining, right? So
right.
It's definitely a good time to do that. From my perspective, I think it's better time to do these types of transformation when the business is doing well than to do that when, you're in a bit of a hardship from a financial perspective.
Right. Couldn't agree more. So what about the transformation itself? Tell us a little bit about the scope of what it is you ended up doing. You talked a little bit about where you're at and where you started from, but what was the kind of lead us down the path of how you started down that path of the transformation?
Yeah, so we are a very vertically integrated company, right? And that means, think of it as majority of the product that goes into your finished goods are homegrown. We also have a fairly strong arm of logistics operations. So when you look at that, us as a vertically integrated company, we really attacked all aspects of that vertical integration and the value chain, except for sales and marketing. So we really went after, start from sourcing, finance, planning, good chunk of manufacturing, and customer service, your order taking and logistics. So we really took on, I often say that we replaced the backbone of the company. We didn't touch anything of sales and marketing, be it direct to consumer type of initiatives, be it CRM initiatives. We had things running in parallel, but we didn't bring that into the scope of this transformation.
Right. Got it. So tell us a little bit about the specific technology you deployed and sort of how you got to that or arrived at that decision.
Yeah, and I think this would be a great point for those that are in the market thinking about this, right? So when we took on this type of a journey, there were many in the marketplace from a technology perspective that we can really anchor to, right? There's not just one company. And we did a couple of things. So one thing we did really well was we brought in an outside perspective, completely technology agnostic, not having married to a specific technology, and really used them to help us understand what is the market space like, what are some of the pros and cons, what are the best suited vendors from a technology perspective that really matches us from an industry complexity as well as our growth ambition and our natural ambition to do this once for the next 2-3 decades, right? So it was very important that we partner with someone that has strategic trajectory to where we want to be, but at the same time has a very good fit to our complexity and our basic needs of today, right? And we went through a very deep exercise. We spent about 1 year preparing ourselves in selecting technology, selecting implementation partner, and really preparing that internal team, be it from the C-level board executive all the way to individual contributor, not just identifying them, but really shaping them and getting them ready for this transformation. In the end, we selected SAP, and with it, we also changed our fundamental strategy in terms of being, a best of suite rather than best of breed. And we selected SAP as our technology, but we had many others that we looked at. We looked at JD Edwards, we looked at Infor, we looked at Microsoft, various.
Right. And what was it that led you to SAP? Was there anything in particular that really stood out or that was particularly well aligned with what you were trying to accomplish with this transformation and just overall as an organization?
Yeah, I would say a few things, right? So first and foremost, it's there, and this goes back about 4 years, right? So this is a phase where we were in about 4 years ago. So 4 years ago, they were very, very much, very heavily invested in taking their core ERP from ECC into S4 space. So we saw a lot of strategic alignment to really transform ERP for the future and continuously transform that ERP for the future in that space. So again, we saw SAP as a company that has a high investment from an R&D and from a product perspective for continuous evolution. We also saw them as more centric when it comes to product portfolio. It was a company that had less product than Oracle when it comes to ERP. So we found a bit more focus as a company. Outside of that strategic pillar, I would say scale played a big role. So given that we are very vertically integrated and we have a high growth potential, right, and ambitions, the scale played a big role in terms of selecting someone that has proven to be operating in very diverse marketplace, right? I joke around and say SAP is used to build rockets and tissue paper, right? So go find your space in between, right? So we found that diversity to be very appealing, right? And the last but not least, we've had a tremendous work done leading up to this transformation in identifying, how to connect that vertically integrated company from a process perspective. So we really have a different process when you're blending the product versus when you're making the product versus when you're sourcing some of the raw material. And we found that it was possible to lift that type of a process work we did into the technology that SAP was bringing to the table.
And what about some of the complexities of being a beverage manufacturer? Was there anything along those lines that, you're a high volume beverage manufacturer, a lot of different brands. You mentioned acquisitions you've grown through, so I imagine you had maybe some disparity in terms of how the operations worked. Was there anything that really stood out or that was sort of either a sticking point in your evaluation of potential options or led you to SAP?
Yeah, for sure, right? So when I think about the agility with acquisition, that was a big component. How quickly can we integrate the acquired company and its processes? So we found that agility to be available with components like central finances and whatnot in SAP. Though we are a company that really operates with a philosophy of integrating first rather than acquiring and then, lifting and shifting and keeping them on as it is. So we found that to be fairly a strong component from appeal perspective. And then I think the most important, though it's not true today, after 2 years we've learned a lot more, but at the time we were very confident that the blend management component of our industry and our business was very well represented. There isn't a system out there that does this. And we found that SAP had the basic principle to create that type of process manufacturing component using their tool sets.
Right. Yeah. We actually had another client a couple of years ago that made a comment. They're in a similar situation in that they were growing very aggressively through acquisition. And I remember them saying, which it was the first time I'd heard this, or heard a client say this, was that of the acquisitions they did, some of them were using SAP and some of them weren't. But the ones that were using SAP actually were more flexible, and they felt like they had more flexibility to change their operations than the ones that weren't using SAP. And a lot of times SAP has this, people have a perception of it being extremely rigid and hard to change and that sort of thing. So it's interesting to hear that it sounds like that may have been a similar experience for you in that you got that agility, you got the flexibility you were looking for with the product.
Yeah, and it's double-edged sword, right? So if you look through the lens of a C-level, if you look through the lens of the business as a whole, right, it is definitely a platform that opens up doors for flexibility when it comes to operating model change, when it comes to integration of M&A, right? You can stand up a company very fast from an integration perspective. You can stand up a new operating model fairly quickly. And we are one of those companies that probably had every variation of operating model you can imagine, right, when it comes to tolling or co-manufacturing and things like that. And we found that to be very, very easy to configure and operate in. At the same time, it's not something you can deploy overnight or deploy, over a week, right? It is a system that has, if I want to add a new plant or if I want to add a new manufacturing location, it's not a click of a button that drives that type of speed, right? So like I said, it's a double-edged sword. You definitely get the flexibility of operating model, agility of integration, but the people that have to actually do the work, they do spend time, right? It takes weeks to configure the system such that it operates right for you.
Right. So if you had to summarize in this, I'll ask you sort of a summary question, and then we'll take a break, and I'll come back and ask you more detail around this. But just at a summary level, how would you summarize the results of your transformation? I mean, how did it impact your business? Where are you at today?
Yeah, I would do it in two ways, right? If I compare us to the industry, I think from the execution of transformation and what we accomplished, I would put us in the top 5%, right? We were, you often hear majority of the ERPs and transformation fail. So I'm happy to say that we were in the top 5% of the success from that perspective. When I look back and look at the business goals that we had in mind, we've definitely hit the macro goals, which was reposition the company to scale, make it easy to scale, make it easy to operate globally. All of that we've hit. We had a big miss, in my opinion, in two areas, right? One is user experience, right? We went in with a very strong ambition, especially with things like Fiori and the innovations that SAP had lined up, to really elevate that user experience to be more modern, mobile type user experience. And I think we've missed the mark on that, and it has largely to do with the way the product is maturing and evolving. And then we've missed the mark in certain area of our business case, right? So we expected tremendous amount of efficiency in areas like sourcing, and we've not achieved that yet. And again, it has to do a lot with the way that the maturity of the tools are, and as well as in planning, right? So those two areas were behind. We haven't fully gotten there. But outside of that, like I said, if you look at a macro picture, achieved the projects in time, well under budget, really good success from go-live perspective. Overall, companies being able to scale fairly aggressively post-go-live as well.
Right. Good. Well, good. Well, when we come back from a quick break, I'm going to ask you some more questions about how you got there. Maybe some of the good and the bad and the ugly of the journey itself and how you handled some of those challenges. So we're going to take a quick break. We're here with Tarak Patel, and we're going to continue our discussion here after a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control. Are you ready for transformation in 2021? Are you ready for change? Well, we want to help ensure that you're ready at Digital Stratosphere on April 20 through April 22nd. Digital Stratosphere is the only technology agnostic event of its kind, and we're bringing it to you digitally. This unique event is intended for anyone about to go through any sort of transformation, whether it be a digital transformation or a business transformation. This event is going to cover topics from experts ranging from strategy, to planning, to program management, to change management, to technology, everything you need to know to make your transformation successful in 2021 and beyond. And if you're one of the over 1,000 people that attended one of our past Digital Stratosphere events, this one promises to be bigger, better, and even more stratospheric. And the best part is that because this event coincides with Third Stage's 3-year anniversary, we're providing the first day of keynote sessions to you with no registration fee. And if you would like to attend all 3 days of the conference, we've provided deep discounts to celebrate our 3-year anniversary. So bring your entire team to Digital Stratosphere and get ready for transformation. Okay, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. We go live every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. UK time, and 11 p.m. Hong Kong time. We go live on YouTube, so be sure to subscribe to us there. You can watch us every Wednesday there, or you can subscribe to us on any of the podcast platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, whatever your podcast of choice is. And we're here with Tarak Patel talking about a large SAP ERP business transformation at a food and beverage, or actually a beverage manufacturer. And we were, right before the break, Tarak, we were talking about some of the two shortcomings you had in this project. On one hand, you said it was top 5%, went really well overall, but two things you could have done better were the user experience and the business case, or the benefits realization within that business case. But if we back up even more and look at the actual journey itself, not so much the end state, but just how you got there, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced? What were some of the roadblocks or pitfalls along the way?
Yeah, I would say, as any transformation would face this, for us, the number one challenge at the start was to unify and unite the company, right? I think it's utmost important, and one of my early coaches used to say, aligning your sponsors and setting the right expectations, not just at the top, but across the company is very important. And for us, that uniting that voice in the company was perhaps the number one challenge we faced in the beginning. After that, just like any transformation, we faced challenges from various aspects, right? So one is, when you get into these types of transformation, you're working with multiple vendors, be it your software providers, be it your implementation partner. The next challenge was really to make sure that you keep them in sync and you create a culture of one team where all of them are working for your benefit and not pointing out individuals' risks or flaws. So that was a second challenge I would say we faced. And a third, which I kind of talked about in my results, was just the gap, right? Throughout the journey, you're going to learn things that you didn't know, and you're going to find things that you didn't expect, right? So we definitely found plenty of those gaps where our expectations were not meeting, and adjusting to those gaps and continuously keeping your, company, your executives, and your teams aligned was probably my third biggest challenge that we faced.
So let's go to that alignment concept, with your executives, your stakeholders, but also your software vendor and system integrator. How did you achieve that alignment? What did you do to overcome that?
Yeah, so I'll speak in both aspects, right? So when you think about unifying the company, for me, it's very important that you have a strong why, right? People need to know why you're doing it, and there has to be a very strong, alignment on that why, right? So we spent quite a lot of time in shaping why are we doing this, in making sure that every executive that was lined up to this type of transformation understood why we're doing it, and we were getting what they expected out of that transformation vision, right? So we spent tremendous amount of time aligning that. And I was very fortunate to have a CFO at the time who was a very strong sponsor. And I would really advise people that are out there to look for such executive sponsorship. Our CFO really took this upon himself in so many ways, right? And really didn't just sponsor the project from distance, but really sponsor the project by being in the weeds and being with us as we were shaping that. So that played a big role. The company also made some very interesting changes where it unified the leadership under one responsible for this type of transformation, right? So that was also important. that the executives were reporting under one sponsor, right? So that was very important. The owners of the company took a very active interest in making sure that we're aligned on why. So to me, that played a big role. And as I mentioned in the beginning, having a software and SI agnostic party that helped us that brought us together at a next level was very important. So for me, that goes a long way. I think that sets you up for 70-80% of your success.
Right.
The second aspect, we were really strategic. You'd be surprised how much leverage you have over your SI and over your software company when you're buying and when you're in your negotiation phase. So we were very strategic to request very high executives from each of those companies to be part of our steering committee, right? So we went as far as asking for board level members to be in our steering committee, and we were successful. And that opens up doors for driving that strong partnership between various parties that are engaged and involved. And the last piece, which is very important for me, was, we never treated this transformation as something that a partner is going to execute on our behalf. We had a very clear mantra that we are accountable for it, and we lived it in a day-to-day basis, right? So anytime we suspected a risk or we suspected an issue, we would really take an active approach to work that through multiple parties that were involved, bring them to the table all at once, and really treat it as this is a company problem and we all need you to, roll up your sleeves and solve it for us.
Right. You're hitting on a couple really interesting points that I think a lot of companies miss, a lot of organizations miss during these transformations. I think a lot of times companies make two faulty assumptions. One is that my system integrator is going to lead this for me and I'm going to outsource this project to them. And the other is that, this is a project management sort of a project team sort of project that needs to be executed at the project team level without thinking about what do we need from our executive team up top, what sort of top down sort of direction and alignment and unification, as you call it, what is it we need from them. And I think a lot of organizations are almost afraid to do that because being a top down command and control type of company isn't what people necessarily want day to day, but you sort of need that. Even though the trendy thing is to be more of a flat organization and more, collaborative, and you can still maintain that, but still having that clear direction at the executive level is very important. So I think those are both really good points.
Yeah, and I would say, you hit a key point. It's involvement and ownership at that level is equally important as well, right? We were really fortunate where we have a culture of inclusivity. I mean, I've had C-level executives sit in a process. I wouldn't say process design, but process overview session, right? And they would ask for it. They would ask to say, "Hey, show us how the new order to cash process is going to be different." And it's important for executives to have that level of passion, engagement in these types of programs as well. I often joke around and say you have to bring the gods down to the earth if you want this to be successful. Whatever works for you, whether it's monthly, weekly, but they have to stay engaged and at least take full interest, both from how the future is shaping as well as how people and morale of the people is doing.
Right. That's great. That's great advice. Sounds like you've had some good mentors and help along the way too.
Absolutely, it was a great team.
Yeah. So, what about organizational change management? When you think about the changes and the impact that this transformation had on the business, what sort of challenges did you face along those lines, and how did you address them?
Yeah, again, I would say it's often an area that's underestimated or overlooked, right? I would again say a lot to do with just the fact that I mentioned. We had sponsorship that really recognized the challenges that come with ERP and the business transformation. And from the very beginning, we were very clear that this needs to play a good and important role. And to many people's surprise, my counterpart, typically the ERPs are set up where you will have a a program director from IT and a program director from business, and then you'll create a two-in-the-box concept. We, from day one, structured this where my counterpart was from HR. The individual had a lot of experience in operational excellence and also manufacturing space prior, but was very keen on creating the right culture for the program, driving the organizational change management for the program. So we put money where our mouth is, and we created that two-in-the-box leadership with someone that came from HR and had a tremendous amount of manufacturing transformation experience, but had a huge focus on making sure that we create the right team, we create the right culture, and we keep this from communication, training perspective, and forefront of the organization. So that played a big role. We also were very strategic in hiring an OCM leader. We were lucky to hire someone that had 12 ERP under their belt. So that played a big role, right? And we were very clear that change management is, in my opinion, equally important as any other tenet of that program. So that played a big role. After that, right, we simply followed what many methodologies exist out there in the marketplace, but we followed a very strong change management methodology. We were like you mentioned, we were in front of every executive you can imagine in the company, whether you were part of the program or not, at least once a month, once a quarter, keeping them appraised on what's happening, what's not happening. We operated with a very strong culture of transparency. We used to say early bad news is a good news. And we would, post all of our progress, good, bad, or ugly, on all of our walls. Made it very transparent, both inside that epicenter where the program was operating and outside in terms of how things were going, right? So those were, I think, the key tenets for what made our OCM successful in the program.
Right. That's great. And you're right, a lot of organizations do overlook that, but it sounds like you had a clear strategy, tool set, methodology, and support to address that.
Yeah, and this is another good area of ownership, right? We encountered fairly strong challenges early on. Our SI methodology for change management, their approach, and the way they were integrating their change management with the culture of our company was not very well aligned, right? And very early on in the program, we made an active decision to say we will own it. And the partner that I had was so strong, right? We were able to say, look, we will own that change management with the staffing that we have, the philosophy that we have in a company, and the leadership we have. And we took that in-house and we ran that ourselves. So again, very important to have a good strategy, good people that can really back up that strategy from an execution perspective, a sound methodology, and a clear focus on every day, every hour of your program.
Right. Now, what about the overall implementation time and budget? How did that compare to the actual implementation results as far as on time? Were you on time, on budget, or did you have any sort of discrepancy or adjustments you had to make along the way?
Yeah, on a big picture, we hit our targets. We used to, and this is also an important factor in your success. I would advise every company out there to reevaluate your incentive structure and make it specific for this program, right? So we did that. We went through a complete change on how the people, every single person in the program from top to bottom, are incentivized. And in summary, we delivered, above target, both from time and budget perspective. From a program point of view, yes, we were on time and on budget. But as executives, we knew that these programs don't go on time and on budget. So we had at least given some latitude for our people to hit their target, right? So we were on time, we were on budget. We executed this top to bottom in 18 months. I can't share the number, but sure, it was very expensive program, just like any other company would encounter. But overall, in time and budget, our business case, it took us about a year to realize. And like I mentioned, in all areas except for, I would say, sourcing, we're realizing our business case.
Right. So it sounds like you did, despite the pitfalls and the challenges and things you had to work through, just like any transformation, it sounds like you guys ended up in a good spot. You had said that you feel like this project was in the top 5% of projects out there. If I'm a CIO or a project manager or an executive or business owner that's about to go through a similar transformation, what sort of parting words of advice would you give to them to help them achieve that same goal of not being a failure, not being an underwhelming success, but more of a, one of the top performing transformations? What's the advice you would give?
Yeah, I would summarize some of the points that we discussed early, right? Spend your time preparing yourself, planning yourself well. It pays off, right? Jumping in it too fast is not the right way to do it. So spend your time planning, and it's really about aligning your executives, making sure you go in with a realistic business case, right? Benchmarking yourself with an outside world is not my favorite, but know what's possible. Of course, benchmark to know what is out there, but know your own success, right? So define your own success, align your executive, prepare in terms of, making sure you have done your due diligence from the products that you're going to select, from an expectations that you're aligning. And then most important, right, invest in your people. Make sure you line up the best talent, the right talent. And then last thing I would say is be ready for surprises, right? There's not a day in this transformation that will not give you a new surprise. And be ready for that level of flexibility, agility. Create a culture for your team that can, go through that type of challenges and surprises, right? Founded on teamwork, commitment, transparency. It's very important to create that type of culture. The last thing I would leave for the people that are looking into doing this is if you are in that leadership role of that transformation, whether you are a sponsor, whether you are a director executing it, create proximity to your team and to this project, right? It's important to know people that are working on it, work that people are doing on a day-to-day basis. I think that goes a long way to stay close to that project at all levels.
That's well put, and it's really sound advice, especially because so much of what you're suggesting and recommending is focused on people, people, culture. You haven't talked a lot about the technology itself, which I think is interesting and fascinating, and I agree with, by the way, you're focused on the right things, and that's probably why you were one of the rare breeds of successful transformations out there.
Yeah, Eric, I've heard this so many times, and even though we've had some pitfalls, it's proven again that technology is the least of your complexity in these transformations, right? You have so many other facets that are much more complex than technology. In our case, you kind of said it well, right? Or in our case, if I look back, my biggest challenges were technology because we did the other things so well, right? And when I look at that challenge from a technology perspective, it was really around setting our expectations right? We had an Ariba product from SAP, and we internally marketed that as an Amazon-like experience. It is not Amazon-like experience. It is different. So it's important to, calibrate what you're going to get and align your expectations. And then we were also very early adopter of some of the emerging technology like IBP of SAP. We expected a lot more out of it than what we should have, right? So that's also important to make sure that you assess that well. After that, the implementation to me is not the real challenge from a technology perspective.
Right. That's well put. That's a good place to leave it. Well, I appreciate you being here, Tarak. These are very interesting observations, and really appreciate having the opportunity to learn from your experience here.
Hey, I love giving back, so happy to have this chance, and thanks for giving me the opportunity, Eric.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control and more guests. We'll be right back.
Here we go again. The light is good and roll.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Shake your booty down. Move, 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 move your body down. Shake, shake, shake.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. This is the best of the greatest hits episode for season 1. Some of the best interviews that we've had, some of the highlights of the show so far. We want to put it together for you all in one episode so you can get the highlights and see what you missed if you missed any episodes. And if you've been watching all along, it'll hopefully reinforce some of the highlights of things you've learned throughout the show. And the next guest we want to have on the show is a replay of an interview we had with James Hayward, who is the CFO of a company called Jane's Defense Weekly, which is a UK-based defense publication and research organization. And the interesting thing about this is not only are we now moving across the globe and we're looking outside the United States and we're kind of shifting gears looking at our UK office, our office at Third Stage Europe in the UK, and focusing on one of the clients based out of that region. But in addition to that, it's also a CFO's perspective, which is always unique. And the first two guests we had here on this best of episode were CIO or IT director types. James is a CFO, so he's going to have a different perspective and a slightly different take on some of the lessons learned and the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the other thing that makes this one unique is that he had some pretty unique time and cost pressures that he was under to get this project done. And so we had to go in with a very predefined time box that we had to get this done because he was part of a carve out. So rather than being an integration as part of an acquisition and trying to pull together different parts of the organization, he was doing the opposite. He was trying to spin off, or he wasn't personally doing this, but the entire organization was spinning off from a parent company to create a standalone organization, which entailed creating a standalone back office and set of enterprise technologies to support it. And he had a very limited window to do that. And so it's really fascinating to hear from him how he navigated that and the things that he spent a lot of time on and the things he didn't spend a lot of time on, as well as the sequence of activities. And I think this has some really tremendous lessons learned, even if your transformation has nothing to do with a carve-out or nothing to do with an M&A integration. And even if you're not a CFO, there's a lot of really good lessons from this discussion because many of you are probably under some sort of time pressure and you've got to get your project done very quickly. And so it may be tempting to focus on the wrong things first. And he does a good job of unpacking what he focused on, which is in many ways counterintuitive, but in my opinion, highly effective. And it's typically what we recommend our clients to do. And he is a client. And I'm not saying that's the only reason he did it is because we told him to, but he's a smart enough guy that he probably would have done that anyway. So I want to shift gears then and bring James back onto the show. James, thanks for being here today.
Thank you. Look forward to chatting. And let's go.
Absolutely. So we're here talking about Jane's Defense Group, which is a client that we've worked with you on. They're in the UK. What can you tell us about Jane's Defense Group? What do they do? What's the scope of, how big they are? Maybe just give us a little bit of overview of the company.
Okay, so Jane's is a fascinating business. It started in 1898 when there was a General Jane who identified and used to draw pictures of naval ships. And the idea was that he would use these pictures to actually send out to military commanders so they could identify the profiles of ships on the horizon and identify them as enemy ships. And since then it has grown into what is called open source intelligence provider. And it provides information which is, by its definition, publicly available, mainly via the internet nowadays, on everything to do with intelligence, to do with the security, aerospace, defense industry around the world. Its major customers are the US government, is probably its biggest customer, and all the agencies that sit within it, the Five Eyes, NATO. But there's also, there's Japanese, I think we sold to, 95 countries around the world. And it's a fascinating insight into what you can glean from open source as to how you can provide that intelligence to the security and aerospace industries. It's a really, really high regarded business. And it was actually a privilege to be involved with them.
That's really interesting. It's not the everyday company that you come across.
No, it's not. It's the type of thing which, I mean, actually, you often see in the newspapers, accreditation to Janes or whatever, as they will identify a tank which has been used in Syria, or a tank that's been used on the Ukraine border, and actually, it may well be a Janes intelligence, or sorry, somebody who works for Janes. They're not intelligence officers. It's not classified at all, but they're experts in their field who can recognise the markings of a tank and say, well, that's a certain brigade that belongs there, and therefore that is part of the Russian infantry of whichever. And from there, they can glean all sorts of information. It's all, as I said, it's all open source. There's nothing classified, but it's extraordinary. I've actually sat the open source intelligence course, or the introductory course. What you can glean from the internet and from knowledge. So they've got a hell of a reputation, and they were owned by IHS Markit, which is a huge conglomerate with 15,000 employees. It's just announced a merger. I can't quite remember whom with, but a very, very well regarded company. But there's 15,000 employees in IHS Markit. Janes has got about 350 employees, and they were considered to be, not core to the IHS business. So they were put up for sale just over a year and a half ago. Highly profitable business, a very, very good one, but just not core to IHS's strategic vision. So they put up for sale, and they were bought by a private equity outfit just this time last year, just over a year ago.
Okay. So Janes is a client of Third Stage, and you were involved with Janes prior to our involvement, and you were brought in as interim CFO. Why were you brought in, and what were some of the major challenges you faced when you first came on board at Janes?
So I was brought in because Janes was part of a big corporate. When it was sold, they essentially transferred the business of Janes, if I can call it that, the assets, everything to do with the business of Janes was transferred. It was a division within the transport division of IHS. So they transferred the assets of Janes, or the business of Janes, into a new legal entity. But that was effectively it. It was the front end of Janes. It was everything to do with the commercial side of Janes. As a corporate part of IHS Markit, there was not one single back office function that was transferred. There was no finance, there was no HR, there was no legal, there was no admin, there was no IT, there was no corporate structure at all other than the front end. So it was vanilla. They got the business and everything that the business delivered, but actually nothing to support it in terms of its whole infrastructure. So literally, there was one finance person came across who was an FP&A lady girl who was brilliant, absolutely central. That was the only back office person who came across. Nobody else at all. So we literally started with a blank slate. So I was interim CFO. Well, between the two of us, we were the whole finance department, supported by run-off agreements with IHS Markit to support us in the transformation period. And that's exactly what happened. So I was brought in because I've worked in many companies, and as an interim, as a support to help companies. So I've seen what hopefully good structures look like. And I think that's part of what it was about. It's not me knowing the answers. It's probably more about me knowing the questions to ask. And so I was brought in by the private equity house to help that transformation from being part of a large corporate to part of a standalone within a private equity environment. So hopefully that answers the question. And actually, just to lay the scene there. So the corporate IHS, very well run, really good business, had the absolute classic ERP setup. It had SAP, it had Workday, it had Salesforce, and it had Concur. And I'm doing a similar job at the moment, and it's exactly the same setup. Completely different organization, but it's very similar. So it's a pretty well tested route, SAP, Workday, Concur, Salesforce. So none of this came across, should I say, as part of the transaction at all. So we started with a blank slate, which gives you an opportunity.
Right. So that's really interesting, and that's one of the interesting things about carve outs is I think a lot of times when people think about a transformation, they think about I've got my back office in place. It may be a mess and I need to improve it, but I at least have something there. Whereas what you're saying is you guys were sort of forced to stand up that back office and some of those internal processes and the things that were part of the larger entity.
Yeah, and actually both have their advantages. One of them is you start with a blank slate, which is what we had in James. So we literally start with a blank slate, but you've got to build it up. And you've got actually nobody there to build it up with. So you literally have to build. It's not just buying in that one. It's not just getting the ERP system, commissioning it. It's actually educating, training people. Whereas, and I have done this, is go and fix it in businesses where you actually have a starting point, but it's just not working well. So both of them have their challenges and their advantages. Interestingly enough, one of the things that came out of the James transformation was because we had nobody there. One of the things we actually got a little bit wrong is not quite the right word because you're never going to get everything right, and we'll touch upon this later in the talk, I'm sure. But one of the things which I subsequently found, because I've handed over to a permanent replacement now, is that once you've gone live, because there were no staff there, and no back office staff there at all. They didn't have any of the experience or the trade. Well, they did have some training, but the real training, the on-the-ground training, and you need more of that in a situation where you're doing a carve-out with absolutely zero backup at all. Whereas a business which is transforming, you've got a back office there. Actually, you will have staff there who know how the business works, who understand the mechanics and the flow of the business. Whereas in this situation, we started with a blank slate. So a little bit more training, and you can't beat real live, transactional training for these types of situations. It's just one of the challenges.
Right. Yeah. So how long of a time frame are we talking about here? From the time you were brought in until you actually had a semi-working back office function, what kind of duration were we talking?
So I came in about a month before the transaction finally closed. And then we had a target to try and migrate across about an 11-month period, Salesforce, Workday, Concur, and SAP. So we did Salesforce, Workday earlier, Concur and SAP all became part of NetSuite, which is what we went across to. And so the whole thing has taken, I think they've just about got off their what's called TSAs, transactional service agreements. So the whole thing took about a year, and that was tight, and took a huge amount of investment in a program management office, and a lot of planning. So we did the whole thing in a year, and I've heard anecdotally of people who it's been a lot longer. I don't think I've heard many examples where it's ever been shorter than that. You might be able to shorten it by a month or 2 months, but these things take a lot of time, and a lot of investment in resource. So it's just over 1 year in. I now know that they are working and functioning properly on their new ERP system. I think all the ERP systems are now functioning properly. It's never a perfect world, and we'll come on to that, but it's worked.
Right. So what are some of the, in that year timeline, which is fairly aggressive, if you think about all the things that must have gone into that. It's not just technology, obviously. You're also talking about standing up the business processes and the team and all that stuff. But what are some of the biggest challenges you faced when going through this transformation?
Well, for a start, we had no staff at all.
That's
literally,
a problem.
apart from you've got the what I call the front of house staff, the sales guys, The guys providing the content in the case of James, because it's intelligence, the CEO, the senior leadership team, and they are great, but they've been part of a corporate which has got, many, many thousands of people. And actually what is very apparent is there's a huge amount of implicit support that goes into those structures, which people don't really realize they've got until it actually disappears. It's something which you wouldn't even, explicitly think about until somebody takes it away. So part of it was about a culture change which happened over a period of time, on making people realize that they were no longer supported by the mothership, as I would call it. There's a whole decision-making process. You're no longer going up through layers and layers and layers of management to get decisions. Guess what? Private equity world, you can make decisions within days, very, very quickly. If something's got to be done, it's got to be done. Recruitment was clearly a big challenge, and we spent a lot of time and a lot of investment into making sure we could recruit. We recruited about 90 people, of which probably more than half were in what I would call the back office functions. So that recruitment process started, really immediately the deal was signed, if not actually before the deal was finally completed. Because you've got to get these people on board, and it just takes time. You want top quality people, and you're going to have to take 3 months to recruit and 3 months for them to work out their contracts. And before you know it, you're 6 to 8 to 9 months into your year. So that's a huge part of it. And we actually took on board a lot of interims. We set up program management offices, which was absolutely key. And I think I'll touch upon that later on. But having specialists who know what they're doing just gives you that peace of mind that actually your decisions are hopefully being, formed in the context of people who understand the consequences and also the challenges that you're facing.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So it's on the surface, it sounds like you had to stand up some technology and some systems, but when you really dig underneath that, there's a lot more to it, obviously, with the processes and the hiring and the people, the culture, all that good stuff.
It's only people who make decisions. It's only people who do things. All these systems, they're all good. Whether it's your NetSuite, your Dynamics, your SAP, your Oracle, whatever, they're all good systems. They're all mainstream, and some are more appropriate for different businesses. So the only thing that's probably going to let you down is actually people.
Right.
Absolutely. Only people who drive machines.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. If you don't have good people but great technology, that's not going to do you a whole lot of good.
It's a very bad mix.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm going to build on that topic here in just a second. We're going to take a quick break here with Transformation Ground Control. We're here with James Hayward from James Defense Group. We'll be right back.
Hey, Mama, it's me.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Okay, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with James Hayward of James Defense Group. And before the break, James, we were talking about some of the challenges that you had with the transformation and just all the magnitude of scope of all the things you had to address in standing up some of these back office functions and systems and team members. But you said something that was really interesting in the midst of all that. You talked about culture, and you mentioned that there's a cultural change or a cultural shift that you had to enable as part of this transformation. Maybe help us understand that. What was that cultural shift? How did you go about it? What was that all about?
It's simply the fact that you're taking a an organization, and particularly a management team, who've been part of a very, I mean, it's not a rigid hierarchy. It was a great company on reflection. But you're dealing with a company that had 15,000 people in. And to run a 15,000 person business, and I'm actually dealing with one now which has got a 60,000, which was 60,000 people. To run an organization like that, you actually have to have quite a sophisticated but quite a rigid structure for the decision-making process to work up and down. And actually, the materiality of information is completely different. So a business that's turning over, into the billions has got a completely different materiality level compared to one which is being carved out, sold to private equity. It turns over, into the tens of millions or hundreds of millions or whatever it is. So what was important to the group under, corporate ownership, what was not important to the group in terms of, variances to performance is really important to a PE house. Yeah. So, and actually the ability to make a decision, you're not spending, oh God, this recruitment profile has been out there for 6 months. We haven't got anybody. If you want to get out and get somebody, recruit somebody, you go through the right channels and you get a decision within a day. So, right, go for it. Get on and do it. And some of it's a liberation of thought. We're all perfectly capable of doing it. But if you spent, the last 10 years working in an environment where every time you ask for a decision, you're not going to hear back for a month, 2 months or whatever, or ever, or that actually your performance, nobody really cares about the £100,000, issue here. And then you go to an environment which is completely different, whereby the £100,000 is material. And actually, if you want to recruit somebody and they're important to the business, then damn well get on and do it. And so in a way, you're liberating people from the shackles of a corporate environment. And both environments are right, but they're different. So the big corporate culture was making sure that people understood that the journey they were going to go on was going to be different to the journey that they've been on. And most people actually embrace that type of change, but it does require, you can't just force the horse to water to drink. You've just got to allow it to slowly, well, not slowly, but you've got to urge it and push it along a little bit, but accept that actually they're coming from a different place, and hopefully they'll all embrace it. Not everybody ever does. I mean, that's some people like the steadiness of the massive corporate, but that is a massive cultural change when you stand back and look at it for a lot of people.
In addition to the cultural nuances and components, and that's very interesting, by the way, just what a dramatic shift that must be. I think a lot of times companies, when they think about culture, if they think about culture, they're thinking more incremental changes and things that might be a little bit more measured. Whereas just given the situation here, it was more of a 180 in some ways, it sounds like, in terms of how that culture changed.
To go from a corporate background to a part of 15,000 people to one where you're standalone with only 350 people, that is a dramatic shift in positioning and temperament, whatever.
Yeah. So in addition to culture, when you think about PE-owned firms, and I know you've worked for and been involved with transformations at PE-owned firms and then just more corporate, non-PE-owned firms, how is it different going through a transformation in general for a company that's got private equity investors and maybe think of things a little bit differently?
Well, probably the most important thing to take into account is that the time horizon of the average PE investment, not all of them, but most of them, is 5 years. So, they come in, they really make their impact within the first year, 2 years, grow the business, and then look to exit by year 5. So by the end of year 4, I mean, their eyes are always on the exit. That's what they do. But by the end of year 4, they really are focusing in on the exit. So your time horizon within those businesses is, it is, shall I say, quite structured. 5 years, and therefore what you're going to be doing in the first couple of years, and at the end of the fourth year what you're going to be doing. So it's really quite a structured approach, but it's quite definitive. I mean, one might argue that actually within within the quoted sector world, the time horizons are in a way horrendous because you get judged on quarterly results. So people might have the ability within the quoted world to, or not the ability within the quoted world to say, well, actually, hell, if we don't deliver our results this quarter or the next quarter, we're all up for the high jump, and God help us all. Whereas in the private equity world, you could either say it's a short term or it's a long term play, because you say, well, actually, I know that I'm not going to get shot for missing my results for a month or for a quarter or for a half year. I will get shot and I will be held to account if I don't deliver, but at least I've got an audience who will listen to me. So, they have their advantages. The decision-making process, I think, and I touched on this earlier, within private equity is much more agile. You're much closer to the board. That you're not part of a group, each of whom is competing for capital. You're part of a company that they've invested in, and they've invested in because they've got a vision for it. So the vision, their strategy, and your enablement of that strategy should be perfectly aligned. You're not competing with other divisions within a corporate, and therefore the decision-making process should be much, much quicker. You virtually can ring them up and say, this is what we want to do. You put your case and you can get a decision. If it's a decision that goes up to the board level, you can get a decision within the week. And so they're much more, I think they've probably also got a slightly more risk culture, provided it sits in with their strategy for the business. So it is a fundamentally different dynamic that drives the PE structure. And listen, I'm not speaking for all PE houses, so I'm just talking broadly. That is a very, very different approach to how they manage the businesses, and it's liberating in some respects. But you'll also have your feet held to the fire in others. You can get away with it in big corporates. You can get away with some poor performance or whatever. They may just focus on your revenue, not your bottom line.
Right.
So,
yeah, and liberating is usually not the word that I associate with transformation. So it's good to hear that some of your experience has been liberating in that way, where you're able to see or affect a change that has helped make the companies more nimble or more responsive, whatever the case may be.
well, I'd certainly say that I think there's a lot of cases of people who want to do things but feel hidebound by the slowness, the glacial decision making that happens in corporates. That we need to do this, but whereas they understand the importance of it, the people who actually make the decisions don't understand the importance. So they're not part of it. They're not close to it. Whereas the private equity owners will be much, much closer to the company. So I think it's liberating, because once people understand and realize that actually there's an alignment of interest for their company, they're not competing with other divisions. They may be competing with other strategies. That actually it's something which that you can all point in the same direction a lot, and hopefully move forward a lot more quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So with all of your experience with transformations at different companies, maybe I'll focus just on Jane's, and if you have other examples, those may apply as well. But what would you consider the most important components of a successful transformation? Are there a handful of things that sort of jump out at you based on your experience at Jane's as well as with other companies?
Yeah, there are. I've spent a lifetime actually helping companies, many of them which have been distressed. And one of the things which has always hit me is there's a massive relationship between failure and governance. And it's not a subject which people really like to talk about because it's a bit dull or whatever. But I've seen where governance is poor, results are poor. And whilst that can apply to, should I say, the whole corporate, if I look at a transformation project, if you don't get your governance right, you're setting yourself up to fail. It is just a mirror image of the larger problem which I've just discussed, which I've just mentioned, which is if you get poor governance in a company, then you're setting yourself up to fail. If you get poor governance on a transformation project, you're setting yourself up to fail. God's sake, get the governance right so that the reporting and everything about it is correct. Because if it's not, you'll all end up fighting. You'll all blame each other, and the whole thing will go, up in smoke. And the results from that just do not bear thinking about. So get your governance right. Preparation. I don't know how many times I could say it. Prepare. But invest it all up front. Do your preparation, and then everything else should actually flow from that. Setting up a program management office, really important. And invest properly in that. Don't think you're going to save some costs just by not investing in a program management office, because if you don't invest, you're kidding yourself, and you'll regret it. Most people, when they go through a transformation program, have probably never experienced it. Maybe some people, most people might experience once in their life. That does not mean that you know what to do at all. So just accept the fact that actually going from A to B, and it's something you've never done before, you might have done once, is something you should probably ask experts to help you with. Because if you get an expert who's done it 30 times, he will go straight to the nub of the problem way before you. And just because you're competent in an area doesn't mean that you're capable of getting it right the first time. And I'm sure, the second time you do it, you go, oh gosh, I'm that much further up the curve because I know exactly what to do. And the third time you do it, you're really a long way up the curve. So if you get somebody who's done it 20, 25 times, trust me, he's going to take you from A to B without going round the bloody houses at all. And knows how everything fits. So to me, you just don't kid yourself that you've got the experience to do it. Negotiating contracts with the likes of Oracle and Microsoft and AWS, the chances are, yes, you may be very good at negotiating contracts, but you have no idea what type of terms and conditions they're giving to other people. So whilst you may walk away thinking I think I've got a great deal, unless you've actually dealt with lots of contracts with these guys, you've got an absolutely asymmetric view on life. And therefore, don't think for yourself, don't think for one moment that you actually have the skill, the capacity, the capability to know whether you've even driven a good contract. And it's a contract that's fair. It's not just about money. It's about making sure the whole thing works for you. I would never profess ever to knowing anything about anything like this. I would just simply, I think that the job of somebody in my position is to ask the questions, not to answer them. I'm not experienced enough to say this is the right thing to do. I'm hopefully experienced enough to be able to say, I have no idea what is the right thing to do. I need some help. Building contingency, because it's never going to be as cheap as you think, and it's never going to deliver everything you think in the first instance. So manage people's expectations. Don't think that you've got a magic wand when you make a decision. The hardest part of the journey starts not when you've said we're going to transform. The hardest part comes when you actually say we're doing it now. We're actually delivering it. Making the decision to transform is easy. Actually delivering it is where it's really, really important. Last thing is, I say last, I'm sure we could go on for hours, but recruit early. Don't think, well, the system's going to go live in October, therefore we'll recruit in September. It's that is a real short-term saving for some. It's not a clever one. Just recruit early, get people, and just invest in training people and get them engaged as early as possible. Because against the cost of I'll touch on this, the cost of failure of a transformation. Sit down and ask yourself, what is going to happen if I can no longer invoice people? What's going to happen to my working capital? What's going to happen if I can't get my results out to the public, if it's a quoted business? What's going to happen to the senior management team when I go to the private equity house and say this whole thing has gone wrong? You know, there are the costs of fixing are just astronomical. The hidden costs of fixing. Don't try and kid yourselves about the upfront costs. Oh, well, that'll cost, tens of thousands of dollars to fix. The costs on the staff, the morale, the management team, if you get it wrong, are astronomical. So just do everything you can to make sure you get it right, and just don't kid yourselves by saving a nickel and diming here and there, because it will bite you in a way which, well, actually, you probably won't know about because you'll be booted out, I suspect.
Yeah, that's unfortunately you're right on that, and so much of what you're talking about here, I was jotting down some notes as you were talking. You mentioned governance, preparation, setting up a program management office, bringing in the right outside help, negotiations, etc. So much of what you've talked about and what you alluded to is the upfront piece of it, the stuff you do before the project really gets started. And what's interesting is that you were under fairly immense time pressure to stand this up. And I know a lot of organizations, a lot of clients we work with are under similar types of pressure, maybe for different reasons. Maybe there's economic conditions or a merger that's happened or whatever the case may be that is causing some sort of urgency. And then you add to that the whole agile movement and the need or the want that organizations have to be more nimble and move faster. So there's a lot of headwinds that would suggest that maybe you don't take that time up front because you're spending time up front planning and preparing when you could be doing. And so I think it's very interesting because it's almost counterintuitive but very smart to say, we're going to take a step back to be able to take 2 steps forward and to take 2 steps forward quickly. So I guess the question would be, how much of the time of the year or so that you spent on the transformation, how much of that time, just order of magnitude, did you spend on that upfront preparation and all those things you talked about?
Yeah, I think we probably spent more time preparing than we did in the actual transforming, so to speak. No, we definitely did. We spent a lot more time preparing, getting the scope of works right, trying to understand the needs of the business fully, and absolutely scope everything out. Much more so than the data migration and the towards the month or so up to the going live that was it. It was the going live data translation stage came towards the second half or well into the second half of the project. And I think that I should say here that the thing about these projects as well, I think probably maybe more so on the finance side than on the other sides, is it's not until you actually start transforming the data into the way you want to see it and start using it that your red, amber, green start really wrapping up. Because you can get, if I was to take the old classic red, amber, green rag status for a project, don't kid yourself because you've got green, that it's actually really when you get to the final stages of the project that you really begin to stress test it. So don't think because you're green all the way up that you're not going to face your speed bumps, your reds, your ambers towards the back end of the project. But I'd like to think you mitigate it by doing lots and lots of preparation up front, getting the scope. The systems integrators you're going to use, they're going to do what you tell them to. And we actually had a specialist on the financial side. We had somebody there who just sat as the go-between between the company and the systems integrator to really make sure that the interpretation of what we wanted was clearly and well defined. Because the systems integrator, if you say, go left, they'll go left. If you say jump, one step forward, they'll jump one step forward. If you actually shouldn't have said go left and you should have said go right, it's not their fault. You've got to make sure you give them a really clear instruction. And you won't know that until the very end of the project. So investing up front. So I would probably say, Eric, I'd probably say we spent close to 2/3 of the time, should I say, doing the preparation stage before the transfer. Some of it runs in parallel, but before the transformation ETL stage, to use the lingo. So just, if you prepare it properly and you direct them properly, then you've got hopefully a half decent chance of getting it right.
Right. Well, that's fascinating because it's rare that you hear that someone, especially at your level, at a CFO level, at the C level, that recognizes that you're actually moving faster by taking that time up front to plan. I think the instinct is to just go, go, go. Let's not worry about planning. Let's go, because we've only got 12 months or whatever our timeline is. So I think that's very intuitive and rare to hear that. So that's refreshing. If you had to summarize, for those of our audience members that are on a transformation or about to start a transformation of some sort, whether it's a digital transformation or business transformation or reorg, whatever it may be, how would you summarize just the closing words of advice you'd provide to them?
Okay, a couple of thoughts on that one. Consider the cost of failure up front. Genuinely, at the board level, you should consider what will happen if it goes wrong. Because it's easy to say, that's just the back office, let's let them get on with it. But just understand just what the costs are. And the costs are huge. I'm not just talking about financial costs if it goes wrong. You need to manage the expectations of the board. I say you, I don't mean that in some sort of proverbial sense. I mean, one needs to manage the expectations of the board and the company. This is not a magic wand. You're not going to suddenly find yourself way better off for doing it. It will take time. It's not something you don't go. You don't climb Everest in a day. It takes you a long time to actually see the benefits of it. So just manage the expectations of the board. You're not going to solve all your problems with one fell swoop. It will take a long time to bed in. And just because you've gone live doesn't mean to say your project's over. It's not. You're probably just starting. Getting the benefits of it is not something. It's not turning a switch on and off. All right. It will take more time. It's going to cost you more than you want, and it's going to deliver less than you want in the short term. In the long term, I'm absolutely able to deliver everything. Well, hopefully, but it'll, manage the expectations. You've got to have champions running throughout the company, because you could easily get the board or somebody on the board saying, right, this is what we've got to do. You must have the champion on the board, but you need that vein running through the company, because if the champion at the top is not supported by the operations team, by the back office team who just say, yeah, this is the thing to do, then they're not even going to see it, because they're getting their monthly board report. They're not even going to see the resistance that you get on the ground. So you want to get literally running the whole way down. And to me, some of the most important people in the company are those at the junior end. They're the ones who deal with the actual, should I say, the workings of these ERP systems day in, day out. Listen to them, for God's sake. They're the ones who are sitting there pushing the buttons and having to manage Workday or Salesforce or Concur or SAP or NetSuite. They're the ones who are doing it. So listen to what they do. Don't think that just because you've been there and done it and you're 30 years in the business, you know all the answers. No, we don't. It's systems are changing so rapidly and so often. There is no way we can keep up with it. So communicate and listen all the way down the organization. And final things was get independent advice. This is a holistic exercise. There is no way that any individual is going to understand how all the component parts, within a company, of how all the component parts, how these ERP systems all mix together, how Salesforce works with NetSuite, but it doesn't work with Dynamics or as well, or what's going to be required as middleware. You need independent advice, because you're not going to, unless you've been doing this for as long as you guys have, it's not going to work that you're going to know the answers, Because what was yesterday's solution, or the solution 2 years ago, will have moved on. What were the terms of a contract that Microsoft were offering you or offering people 2 years ago? Now it's more cloud-based. It's not. It's going to be different. What you can get, how you knit different countries together, what all those component parts are. Don't even think that you know the answers. You don't. So, for God's sake, get independent advice, because if you get it wrong, it's going to cost you your company, your livelihood, and your job. And the very last thing I would say, and I will admit I've nicked this from somewhere. I read this recently and I thought this was brilliant. It says, "Be wary of the loud mouth with a strong opinion, masquerading as the expert, versus the quiet guy who spent his life researching an area." And I think that's great words, because we all know we all know who those people are, and it's easy to be bowled over by them. But just take caution, is what I would say.
Right. Well, that's great advice. I appreciate you sharing those insights. And obviously, me being biased, I think one of the best decisions you made was to hire that independent outside help from our team at Third Stage. But that's me being biased, obviously there.
Yeah, it was brilliant. And in the schemes of the whole project, it was, to be fair, relatively, it was a tiny part of the cost of the whole project. But if you set off on the wrong course, at least I felt that we were setting off on the right course, and that was absolutely, it was money well worth spending, because it would be so easy to get these things wrong. So I always would countenance people to go to people who've had experience doing these things. Most people will never do this, or maybe once in their life.
Yep. And there's a lot of battle wounds and lessons to be learned after multiple times through it. Well, James, thank you very much for being here today. I really appreciate your time, and appreciate being on the show here today. I know you're on LinkedIn, so people can connect with you on LinkedIn. Any other ways that they can get a hold of you or learn more about you, or is LinkedIn the best way?
LinkedIn is the best way, because I'm just trying to rebuild our website.
There you go.
But no, LinkedIn is the best way.
Perfect. All right, James. Well, thank you very much. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eric. Appreciate that.
Are you ready for transformation in 2021? Are you ready for change? Well, we want to help ensure that you're ready at Digital Stratosphere on April 20 through April 22nd. Digital Stratosphere is the only technology agnostic event of its kind, and we're bringing it to you digitally. This unique event is intended for anyone about to go through any sort of transformation, whether it be a digital transformation or a business transformation. This event is going to cover topics from experts ranging from strategy to planning, to program management, to change management, to technology, everything you need to know to make your transformation successful in 2021 and beyond. And if you're one of the over 1,000 people that attended one of our past Digital Stratosphere events, this one promises to be bigger, better, and even more stratospheric. And the best part is that because this event coincides with Third Stage's 3-year anniversary, we're providing the first day of keynote sessions to you with no registration fee. And if you would like to attend all 3 days of the conference, we've provided deep discounts to celebrate our 3-year anniversary. So bring your entire team to Digital Stratosphere and get ready for transformation.
Unless we try it, we'll never know. Unless we ride it, we'll never grow. Unless we try it, we'll never know. Unless we ride it, we'll never grow. I think I'm ready now. I think I'm ready. I'm ready. I think I'm ready now. There's something deep inside.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. This is the best of / greatest hits episode for season 1. This is our curated version of all the highlights and the best interviews, or some of the best interviews we've had on the show so far in the first 12 episodes. And what I want to do now is, so far the discussion has centered on clients and people that work at the client organizations. getting their perspective on what went well, what didn't go well. And those case studies also centered on start to finish, sort of soup to nuts situations where we and the team here were involved from the very start until the finish of the project. But for this fourth interview, I want to shift gears a little bit and bring on someone who's not a client, but he works with our clients, and his name's Dave Beldyk. He's a senior manager, and he leads many of our client engagements. And one of the client engagements that he led that I want to unpack and revisit his interview for was a project recovery. So it was a transformation project that had gone off track in ERP implementation, SAP in particular, SAP S4HANA. Project didn't go well, system integrator didn't do their job, internal project manager at the client organization wasn't doing their job very well either. Got in over their heads, project got off track, and they hired us to come in and help fix it and help clean it up. So I want to get his perspective because he's got two different unique perspectives. One is he's an outside consultant just like I am, so he has that outside perspective, and he kind of relates, in the interview, he relates it to other experiences he has, and he used to be on the client side of things, and now he's a consultant helping clients through similar journeys. And the other reason why it's unique and his perspective is unique is because he's coming in after damage has already been done. And so he's got some interesting perspectives on things that we can take away to make sure we don't do early in the project. And if we're in the midst of a project and we're starting to see some of these same warning signs, it's a way to understand what either can be done to mitigate those risks before they get out of control, or if you're already at a point where some of the risks have repeated themselves or you're seeing some similar risks as what Dave talks about, you at least hopefully can get some insights as to what to do to maybe correct or remediate some of those challenges and problems that you may be facing. So regardless of where you are in the transformation journey, there are some really good lessons here. And Dave has a really good way of taking very complex concepts and simplifying it and explaining it in a way that the average lay person can understand, including myself. And so it's a great conversation. I enjoyed this one in particular because he has that unique perspective. So Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Eric. Great to be here.
So we have this client that you and I have worked with here in recent months, and they had gone down the path of trying to implement SAP. They get to a certain point where they felt like the project was off track and they ran into a number of challenges. Long story short, they call us and say, hey, can you come help fix this and help us get this project back on track? So I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions around how it got off track and what some of the lessons were and what ultimately we did to recommend to help them get back on track. But before I do that, maybe just give us a quick overview of the organization and a little bit of understanding of the size and scope and complexity of the organization. We can't mention them by name because of client confidentiality, but maybe just give us a little bit of background about the client in general.
Yeah, they're a major distributor of specialty chemicals and what I'll call related supplies. They're about $1 billion business, and they've got over 40 sites, most of them in the U.S. and Canada. They have over 40,000 SKUs that they sell. So it's quite a mix. They've got quite a variety of products they do. I mean, they have bottles and cans and drums and boxes and roll goods and sheets, and so it's quite a broad mix of things. But they basically get supplied by over like 600 or so manufacturers. So their whole thing is they're kind of the one-stop shop for their customers. So they don't have to go to 600 folks. They go to one stop and they supply them. So being really good at the logistics and the warehousing part is really their key thing, is being able to do that really well.
So the high volume distribution model with cost efficiency and minimizing cost, that's sort of their model, right?
Absolutely. And they do everything from supplying the mom and pop guys to some of the big names out there. So it's all over the board in terms of size of orders and frequency and stuff like that. So yeah. Yeah.
And you mentioned one thing already that is sort of I wouldn't say it's a red flag, but something that, as consultants, we would kind of want to hone in on right away, which is that, they make chemicals, and anytime you have a process manufacturer or a product like that's process based, where it's not a discrete widget that you're just putting two things together and you end up with one. This, you're talking about converting units of measure and getting ingredients that you then have to convert into barrels and gallons and different things like that. And that tends to create
Exactly, that's right. So it's not just kilograms versus pounds. You got the whole gallons versus liters versus pounds versus sometimes square feet and square meters. All that stuff going on. That's true.
Yeah. So we'll dig into that a little bit more because
Okay.
that technically or typically creates a lot of challenge for these sorts of implementations, as you well know with your background. But before we get to that, when they first reached out to us, they're already midstream in the project. They had already selected SAP. They knew they were going down this path. They got to a certain point and felt enough pain that they felt the need to make some changes and to ultimately reach out to us and have us come in and assess and help give some recommendations of how to get the project back on track. What were some of the early signs that they had when we first engaged with them that they knew that things were off track?
Yeah. Well, really, the very first sign that things were in trouble were something we didn't hear a whole lot about because they had some internal issues, I would say, between some of their leadership and the system integrator. And ultimately, they ended up kicking out the system integrator. And so then it was a few months later that one of the members of leadership actually left too. So we'll never know that whole story. Obviously, there was trouble in paradise, so that was kind of a red flag to begin with. But when it really became obvious to everybody that there was trouble was kind of after the first go live. There were things they were trying to implement that seemed to test out pretty well in the classroom setting, but when they took it to real life, it didn't work so well. Had a lot of troubles with that, and so that was one of the problems. It took much longer to stabilize than they thought. And they had a total of, they're going to do like 5 rollouts. So, you know how these things go. You got to move on to the next one while one's stabilizing. And when they tried to do that, their whole concept was they had the notion of doing a global build. So they didn't expect a lot of build activities between the first and second rollout. But as it turned out, they had a few missed requirements. So they had much more build activities than they thought. So that kind of caused 2 kind of things. One, it threw a kink in their schedule from a build standpoint. But then you got these poor guys that are trying to stabilize the first rollout while folks are changing the system in the middle after they're doing that. So they ended up having to do a lot of regression testing that they had not planned for. So that was really when they really raised their hand and say, we're in trouble and we need another set of eyes on this thing to make sure we're not driving this thing right in the ditch.
Yeah. And, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, they actually caught the problem sooner than a lot of clients we work with. A lot of clients get a lot further along before they finally realize, wow, we're really in trouble here and we need some help. So they at least caught it relatively early. I mean, you never want to see anyone have to go down that path, but at least they caught it semi-early. What are some examples of, I'm intrigued by the comment you made early in your response there about how the stuff in the classroom didn't convert to reality or production. What are some examples and what do you think caused that? I mean, was it?
This is actually, this is a good example because it's a classic one that we see again and again. They were trying to implement, let me back up a minute. Most of the time in their legacy system, they were used to using FIFO, first in, first out. And I say most of the time because they did what I call quasi FIFO, and which basically means they did it when it was convenient. But now they wanted to take that extra step and kind of hard code it, so to speak, hardwired into the system, make the ERP system force them to do FIFO, first in, first out. Well, when it's sort of loosey goosey, kind of semi quasi FIFO, when you get to that point where where the system's telling you, pick this drum that's way in the back, way in the bottom, and you got to move 8 things out of the way. When it's a quasi FIFO, you sort of can, hand wave and say, well, we'll just pick another one. We'll replace that. So, you might have had to pick 10 pallets and 9 of them are meet the FIFO requirement. The last one didn't. But as soon as you say, I'm going to force it from my ERP system, then guess what? You can't wave your hand anymore. You got to go get that drum. You got to get that one, and you got to move those 8 things and get them out of the way. And if you have that happen on every order or every other order, suddenly your smooth, efficient operations just grind to a halt. And they underestimated that. They did not anticipate that. The functionality worked as planned. I mean, it said, this is the oldest one, go get it. They just didn't realize what go get it meant. So that was one problem. The other problem, which is related to that, is they're working in these little handheld devices. So if you've seen those, they got little tiny screens. You don't have a lot of real estate in those screens. So in the old days, when it said, go pick 40 batches, 40 pallets of material XYZ, you didn't need a lot of real estate. You just start finding material XYZ and scanning. But when it says, no, go pick these 40 pallets, now suddenly you've got to go scanning through all these screens. And what used to take them 1, 2, or 3 screens to get through, now they were flipping through 20, 30, 40 screens to get through that. So they ended up actually having to kind of rework that whole design of how they did their handhelds. So these are all things that in the classroom it looks great, but when you get out in the real world, they didn't mimic the real world very well when they did their testing, and they found out, unfortunately, at go live that this was not going to work out so well, and that's obviously a bad time to find out that it's not going so well.
Yeah, and just to maybe jump ahead to kind of solutions or lessons from those couple examples you gave, particularly the classroom setting not reflecting reality. What, if you could, having watched the game film, you kind of saw what they did and how it ended up, you go back in time, what would you have done different? I mean, would you have suggested just more robust scenarios that they test, or what are your thoughts on how do you fix that?
Exactly. I think, what I always like to see is that real well-defined scenarios, that the kind of real day in the life, what's it really going to be like, involve the people that really do it. If you can do it in the area that's really going to take place. Anytime you have to put your hands on product and materials and move them around and that sort of thing, it's good to be out where all that happens. If you're taking an order and you're doing business planning type activities, you can kind of do that remotely. That's not the same as, when you're on the shop floor and there's physical real world implications that you need to take into account. So I always like to, do the scenarios for real. If you have to pick 100 item order, pick 100 item order, test it, see what that's really like. Don't just say we pick 1 or 2. It's not rinse and repeat 100 times. That doesn't get it. You got to really see what it takes to do that. So I definitely say, you try to do that kind of thing. The other thing that when you think about it too holistically like that, you realize that these picking strategies, it's not just about the picking strategy anymore. The way I put it away has a big impact on my ability to go pick it. So now you got to think through the put away strategies, and that starts to, then the pieces start to all come together. So when you really, when you do your testing, make sure you do the end-to-end testing, from the time you receive it to the vendor to put it away, and then you go back and retrieve it to make sure that you've kind of got the whole end-to-end things. Because if you look at things in isolation, sometimes it looks okay, feels okay, but when you put it all together, sometimes not so much.
Yeah, it's a good point, and it raises another question. While we're going down this thread, is what in the testing that was done, or in the classroom training and the testing that was done up front, what were the right people involved? In other words, were there people that were sort of working on the front lines that you would have expected would have picked up on these nuances or these disconnects between what they were seeing in the classroom versus the way things would actually work? Or did they not involve the right people? Or what do you think the reason why some of that wasn't captured or caught earlier?
Yeah, I think they involved a lot of the folks that were kind of managing the area. Not necessarily the guys with actually running around picking the stuff. They're too busy out there picking, right? So they had some other people doing the testing, and they verified that the functionality worked, but they had that disconnect between the physical world and the system world, and they just didn't know, they didn't realize. And like I said, they had always thought that we do almost FIFO almost all the time, but there's a big gap between almost all the time and 100% of the time, and they just didn't realize how big a leap it was. And so they didn't involve all the right people. nor did they bring the physical world into play. I think that's one of the things and it's common. Most people don't do this in the physical world. The testing, a lot of it is classroom. But if, like I said, when you actually have to put your hands on product and move it and touch it and feel it, where that label is physically, and can you get to it and read it and scan it, that matters. And so unless you've got folks that really know it inside and out, sometimes it's best to say, we're going to do this testing in the warehouse. We're going to go out there. We're going to scan. We're going to put our hands on it. We're going to put it on a fork truck and move it around. And when you start doing that, that's when you find, we might have to reconfigure our warehouse a little bit. And when I say reconfigure, I mean in a physical way, not in a system way, but the things that you used to put, when you start to stack things up, suddenly you realize maybe I should do this differently. Maybe I shouldn't be stacking these things up because it creates a pain in the butt for me when I have to go back and get them. So helping to get that physical real world, however you do it, that's what you kind of got to get that notion in there as best you can.
Yeah. Getting the right people in the right real world scenarios laid out. It sounds like that's something that was missing there.
Yeah.
So you've already touched on this a little bit, but I'll ask it anyway to see if we've missed anything so far. But when we think about some of the biggest challenges that this client was facing and some of the biggest pains they were facing as they were going through the transformation before we got involved, what were the biggest challenges beyond what we've already talked about? Were there other things that they really were struggling with along the way?
Well, you did mention the one thing early on was some of the unit of measure stuff. That is challenged for a lot of people. Especially with in the SAP world, we all know SAP is very rigid in some things that they do. A unit of measure is certainly one of the things where there are challenges, and they have a lot of variable weight product, and the way they were trying to deal with that, it caused a lot of issues, because if you wanted to go pick 5 drums, but they were all different weights, you couldn't really pick them by the drum. You had to kind of pick it by the weight. And if you didn't, and so that it created a whole number of issues that they really didn't have in their legacy system. And the way they define their badges and all that stuff comes into play, and what kind of options you have and how you can define your units of measure. And so they made some decisions early on without understanding the implications of what that would mean, what doors it would close and what doors it would open. And when they did that, they found themselves having to do some custom stuff to get around some of the early decisions we made. What we ultimately ended up doing was kind of walking them through. We started like from a blank sheet of paper and talked through some of the strategies that you could do to deal with these issues and really solve them at a root cause level. But ultimately they ended up deciding that to do it right, if they were going to do it from the very beginning, they would have defined their badges at a different level, and that would have allowed them to use, not to get too deep into details, but badge specific units of measure, and which would allow them to pick exactly a drum, even if it's different weights. All those things could have worked, but the way they defined their badges were at the level that the vendor defined the badge, which was 40 drums is one badge. And so when you're trying to pick from there, now you can't use the full functionality that SAP has. So long story short, probably too late for that. What they had to do was some custom activities to deal with that. They wish they had done the other thing, but it was too much to undo to get there now. So, it would have been good if we could have had them from the very beginning and had that conversation day one. It would have saved a lot of time and pain, but at least they understood what was going on, and now they can make a good decision. They knew they were between a rock and a hard place, and now it was either unravel what they had done, or do this custom work to work around it. And they decided to do the custom work to work around it. And for where they were at the time, that was the right decision. If they'd been talking about it 8 months ago, it would have been a different thing, I think.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah. It's always nice to have the benefit of hindsight, but there's a lot of lessons here I think that others could take away and maybe apply earlier in the process to not necessarily have to make the mistakes themselves.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to shift gears a little bit and go the direction you were starting to go, which is more the kind of the solutions. What are the answers to these problems? And what are the recommendations we ultimately made? And what are some of the lessons we can take away from this for other organizations that might be struggling with the same thing, or, might be on the verge of heading down a similar path as this client. So we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back. We're here with Dave Beldyk talking about a SAP transformation gone wrong and what we did to help correct it. We'll be right back after a quick break.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Okay, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Dave Beldyk, talking about a SAP transformation case study, and more specifically, a troubled SAP implementation case study. And before the break, Dave, we were talking about some of the challenges that this company and this client faced, some of the nuances of the mistakes they made, and some of the areas they stumbled, and some of the pitfalls they ran into. But shifting gears a little bit and looking to, what could they do given where they were at that point in the process? Mm-hmm. What were some of those recommendations we made? What was some of that low-hanging fruit as far as the handful of things that we recommended to them that would have the biggest impact on their transformation? What were some of those things that we recommended in the process?
Yeah, well, right when we came in, as I mentioned, they were kind of in between go lives and they were getting ready for the next go live. And so we really, at that point, we kind of looked at it and said, okay, you've been burned. You kind of know what things are happening here. You kind of know how the functionality works and how it has to kind of connect with the physical world to make it all work. So you make sure that you learn from that experience and make sure you do testing of real life scenarios, full detailed real life scenarios. Take a look at your current warehouses that you're getting ready to go live in and make sure that you've got the right people involved doing the testing. Even take a look at where your inventory is situated, because when you're right now, like if you were to flip the switch to go live today, if you knew you had some of the oldest materials tucked way in the back, way underneath a whole bunch of stuff, those are going to be problematic, especially if those are high volume materials that you're going to be using the very first week. You're going to have to go get those things. You could actually think ahead and do a little bit of rearranging of that stuff to basically unpile some of those things now, so that you're not facing that at go live. So they're a little bit smarter. They knew what was coming, but it was about making sure that they did a lot more realistic testing and with the right people, and then looking at it compared to their real inventory and where it was configured. And I think they even made a few changes in the warehouse to, put things in different aisles or different places to make it a little bit more accessible. I think that's, thinking ahead like that is one of the big recommendations we did early on.
Yeah. And it's always a little bit easier as a consultant when you have a client who has made some mistakes on their own and they kind of know what not to do. And a lot of times it's one thing to tell a client, hey, don't go stub your toe. But once they've stubbed their toe, then they feel the pain and they understand more fully,
don't do that again. That's right.
Right. It's like kids with a hot stove, don't touch the oven. And then they touch the oven and then they know not to touch the oven.
That's right.
But, one question I have, a nuance in this is, not every organization that goes through this necessarily has, multiple locations or, multiple phases to where they could take those lessons from, phase one or go live number one and apply it to the next go live. What about this situation where either company doesn't have that luxury for whatever reason, or they're already in the thick of it. They've already gone live and realized, oops, we didn't test this stuff. The classroom stuff isn't translating into the operational real world. What do you do in those cases? Or what did these guys do? Did they just kind of power through and say, we're going to make this work? Or did they back up and say, let's rethink or redo what we just went live with?
Yeah. Actually, in their case, it was a little bit of both. They knew it was always an option to not force FIFO by the ERP system. They didn't have to do that. They wanted to do that. And they decided that, no, we're committed to that. We're going to make that happen. We're going to work through this and stick with that decision. They could have backed off of that. And that's still a card they can play if they really run into big trouble in the future. But I think they're pretty committed to that. So I give them credit for that. They knew it. They now understood exactly what that meant, and they were ready to deal with it. On the other hand, we talked about some of the scanning stuff. That's where they said, you know what, this is not going to work, and we're going to have to make some technical changes. And I mentioned before with some of the unit of measure stuff, they had to make some technical things, some custom activities to, some custom design to be able to deal with that sort of thing. So, like I said, it was a little bit of both, kind of a mixed bag, but that's kind of how they dealt with it.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that's it's interesting to see how different companies respond to those sorts of challenges. Some will just say, well, I guess we're just going to live with it and live in the suboptimal world that we've imposed on ourselves. But in this case, being a high volume distribution company where throughput is so important, they didn't, that really wasn't a good option for them. It doesn't sound like.
No, right. They had delayed their project. They kind of put it on hold, and they were kind of looking at, when should we go live next, and what should the overall schedule look like? So we were dealing with the immediate go live right in front of them, which they still wanted to proceed with. But then we also took a look at what remained, the remaining rollouts, and did it make sense how they had laid those out, and did they have enough time between? And they kind of did. They had a little bit of, they had a process that they were trying to do where they rolled out at a consistent, basically a 5-month cycle, kind of thing, where they had a repeatable cycle for rollout, which is a good thing, because people understand what's coming. But what they struggled with a little bit was, first of all, the rollouts that they had laid out. It's like they had 5 regions defined, so they said we'll do 5 rollouts. Well, when you started looking at the size of each of those things, it really didn't make sense to do that, because some of the rollouts, quite frankly, were too small, and some were huge, and so they weren't, to use the same kind of rollout schedule for each of them just didn't make sense. It really ended up, I think it cost a lot more. In a desire to have something repeatable, they kind of forgot to take into account the scope of what they were doing. And so it really made more sense to group things. We actually came up with a plan that instead of doing 5 rollouts, let's do 4 rollouts, give us a little bit more time between the rollouts, 2 in particular. And then the size of the rollouts tended to match a little bit more likely. And then it made more sense, and it seemed to work better. And at the end of the day, it got them done, the overall project, at the same time. But that would reduce a little bit of risk. So it's always a balancing act between how many rollouts do you do, and you can slice it up and do 20 rollouts. Well, nobody wants to do that. Or I can do one big bang. Well, that's a little dicey too. So somewhere in between, and kind of navigating those waters a little bit, figuring out what the sweet spot is. We kind of helped them with that a little bit. So
yeah, it's a good reminder that there's no easy answer to any of these decisions. Even the recommendations we made to this client, I suspect there are still some significant risks that needed to be dealt with, with that recommendation. If there's an easy answer or an easy button or a silver bullet, I think we'd have a lot more successes in the industry than we have right now.
Yeah, it's all trade-offs. Right?
Yep. Now, what about someone who's about to start a project like this, backing up a little bit and they haven't stubbed their toe yet? What are some of the recommendations that you would make to a similar type of organization that's about to implement SAP or any other sort of enterprise technology for that matter? What would you tell them?
Yeah. Well, certainly, I think it is important to pick a system integrator that you do have a good cultural fit with. I'm not saying that's at the top of the list of your priorities, but it's pretty darn important. You're gonna partner with the system integrator for months, if not years. So it's very important that you get along together, and so that goes, that's absolutely critical. The other thing I think in this case, if you're going to do a global build, and oh, by the way, I do like that idea. I do like the notion of doing a global build because it kind of helps you know upfront what you're dealing with. You know, so if you're going to do a global build, which means gather global requirements, which means engaging people globally early on in the project to make sure you've got their input early on. Now, it's okay to say, you gather requirements and you identify some build activity that you're going to do. I'm going to delay that for 6 months and do it later. That's fine. There's no problem with that. The problem is if you get 6 months down the road, getting ready to go live and do your next thing, and now you have a requirement that you hadn't identified, and suddenly it is a big requirement. It takes a big build. Now you've thrown your schedule into a mess, and you start getting into I got to cut short on the documentation, or I got to cut short on the testing, and you get in trouble there. So if you're going to do a global build, then take it to heart and do it the right way.
Right.
And then the final thing, and I'll say this to anyone who's doing any kind of implementation: do as realistic scenarios as you can when you're doing the testing. Far better to find out that you've got a problem in the testing phase than at go live. So test it. I mean, really strain it. Really try to break it. And that's kind of the best advice I can give.
Yeah, and think through those exceptions. They may not seem like a huge deal, or it may not be a majority of your processes or your normal circumstances, but those are the things, like you mentioned early on, those are the things that can throw a monkey wrench into your entire operations, even if it's a small thing or even if it's an exception that can build up and create a lot of problems.
Yeah. And I think the thing that really caught them by surprise is they felt like they were already doing this FIFO most of the way. They just didn't realize how big a leap it was from most of the way to all of the way. It was a big thing.
Yeah. Now, what about an organization who may already be in the middle of their journey and they're experiencing some sort of challenges, maybe at this magnitude that this client faced, or maybe even greater? What would you recommend to that sort of organization or someone in that situation?
Well, I think the one thing that they did do good, I'll give them credit for, is calling a bit of a timeout and having somebody with an independent view of this to take a look at it and say, are we in trouble or aren't we? And if we are, what do we do? What are our options? I think that was an important thing to do. And I think getting a lot of what we talked about, they sort of knew. They just needed to hear it. They needed to know that what they were doing was the right thing. They had some pretty good plans. I think they realized they'd let it get a little bit out of control. And so even though they had some things they wanted to do, I'd say probably 80% of what they wanted to do, we felt was the right thing. We gave a few suggestions that would be helpful. And I think that was kind of, helpful for them. But I think that when you get into a situation like that, having the ability to do that and call that timeout is important. They could have called a longer timeout. We could have unraveled some of that design and going back to basics and probably dealt with some things. I think that's one of those things where it gets tough because you've committed a lot of time and money to get to a certain point. And when you finally realize, it's like you said, the 20/20 hindsight. At some point you get to a point where there is no return and you either plow forward with what you got, maybe make a few tweaks, or you just say, you know what, we're stopping and we're not doing it. We're not going further until we figure out how we're going to land this thing, because there is no sense moving forward with something you don't think you can land. I mean, you've said it many times. I mean, the amount of time and effort and money that's spent trying to land the failed implementation, it can devastate a company. So you can't let yourself go there. So it's far better to cause a pause and figure it out than to keep plowing forward. I think that's a key thing.
Yeah, that's great advice, especially because, it's always fascinating to me how many organizations are afraid to do that. They feel like, well, I've got a big system integrator here telling me that everything's fine and that it's going to be too disruptive if we pause their resources, or they might have to switch their resources or go staff them somewhere else, and therefore we shouldn't do it. I mean, you look at some of the dollars being spent on not just system integrators, but other just the burn rate of the project in general. You want to dial it in and get it right, and if it means calling a timeout or calling an audible or changing course, then it's your project. Go ahead and do it. I think it's fascinating to me how companies are so afraid to manage more carefully how they spend their time and money and focus on these projects just because someone else is telling them, don't worry about it.
Right. It's true.
Yeah. So good advice. Take control of your project and call the timeout, bring in help if you need it. And I think that's good closing advice. Well, thanks for being here, Dave. Really appreciate the discussion and the time and the lessons learned. This was really, really interesting.
Okay, great. Good talking to you, Eric.
All right, good chatting with you too. And we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more on transformation ground control. We'll be right back.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Okay, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. This is the best of episode, greatest hits of season 1, the best interviews, the things that we think are the highlights of the season so far. And just to give you a little bit of a spoiler alert, this is volume 1. We're going to have a volume 2 next week of some of the other highlights that didn't make it onto this show but are worth noting and worth highlighting. So we're going to pull out some of the additional highlights in addition to these 4 interviews that we talked about today and replayed for you here today. We're going to pick 4 more that we thought were highlights that were worth noting for next week. So be sure to tune in next week for the episode and subscribe to us if you haven't already on YouTube and or your audio podcast platform of choice, whether it's Apple, Google, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, whatever the case may be. There's hundreds of podcast platforms out there, and we are on most of them from what I can tell. And also want to encourage you to register for our Digital Stratosphere event. If you've been watching this entire episode, you've probably seen a couple promos for the show or for the event. It's a free event. You can register for day 1 of keynotes at no charge. If you decide to take part in the other 2 days of the event, the breakout sessions and the workshops, the more hands-on, detailed discussions, I encourage you to register for that as well. We have some steep discounts based on Third Stage's 3-year anniversary happening at the same time as this Digital Stratosphere event. So it's perfect if you're looking for digital transformation, best practices, and understanding of change management, project management, how to handle process improvement, how to find the right technology, how to manage your system architecture, how to optimize the business benefits and the business value of your investments, how to put together the team, all that sort of stuff we're gonna dive into in that 3-day session. Day 1, like I said, the keynotes are free. I'll be speaking on day 1. And then days 2 and 3, there's a small registration fee. I'll be speaking and doing workshops on those 2 days as well, along with other team members from Third Stage. We have clients joining us and providing some content, as well as industry peers as well. So I encourage you to check that out, and that's co-sponsored by Taft Law, who's a partner of ours and a firm we work very closely with in any sort of contract dispute or legal issue. They're a law firm that specializes in that, and they've co-sponsored the event with Third Stage. So I encourage you to register for that. You can learn more. You can see the agenda. You can register at stratosphere2021.com. And if you're not sure if you want to pay for the other 2 days, go ahead and register for day 1. And you can always, if you like what you see in day 1, you can register at the end of that first day. You can register for the next 2 days of sessions. So, that being said, I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Greatest Hits. Join us next week for more, I guess I would call it Volume 2 of The Greatest Hits of Season 1. And we'll dive into some additional highlights from the season so far. So thank you very much for joining. Hope you have a great day, and we will see you on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling, and we'll see you next time.